And your neighbor to your right made it back to. National Carb Day. You can officially eat carbs without guilt.
A little after 6, shall we get started? Okay, I'll call this meeting 6 o'clock work session of City Council to order. I will note for the record that all 5 councilors are present. Ms. Thomas is joining us by Zoom from her office, so she can hopefully get something more important done, at least something that requires her attention specifically, but she's available if we need her. Tonight's agenda is basically to keep working through the zoning rewrite with a particular focus tonight on specific roads and streets that we hope folks had identified for Mr. Freeze so we'd be ready to talk about. Mr. Freeze, you want to start us off?
Absolutely, and I'm not going to be really presenting this evening so much as I'm preserving time for your deliberations and discussion on the items that y'all identified for us. You did have in your packets a memo from me covering each of the areas that were identified by councilors for consideration this evening. We have with us tonight myself, Missy Creasy in my office, as well as online virtually we have Jenny Koch from RHI and Christy Dotson and Lee Einsweller from Code Studio, all available to answer your questions and help you guys work through the conversation.
Okay.
So if there's any opening questions for me, I'm happy to take them now. Otherwise, I'll kick it back to you.
Folks want to have anything in particular you want to start off with?
Can we just work down his list?
Well, before we get to the list, I wanted to address a couple of broader concerns. And some of them I've raised specifically in the last week or so, or 2 weeks, I guess. But they're sort of systemic issues, I guess. One of them deals with the question of how we're handling entrance corridors. And I note that virtually every entrance corridor that we've got in the city is being designated for CX8 or in some cases NX10 if you look at Barracks Road. And my question is sort of a philosophical question of, if we do that, what's left of our entrance corridor review scheme? Because we know, we've been told by the city attorney that the entrance corridor review board would not have the power to change any broad, question of how large the building should be. You can sort of tweak around the edges to make it slightly less objectionable, but if it's objectionably too large, that's not something that the entrance corridor review board can handle. And so my question, I guess, is if we're adopting a scheme that says everybody on an entrance corridor is going to get to be CX8 or higher. What does that say about what our corridors are going to be like? I wonder, does anybody else share that concern, or what we've gotten from the Planning Commission is basically build to the max, and I'm concerned a little bit more about the way that the city looks and feels, and sort of it's not a very quantifiable thing, but I just kind of think that if every time you enter the city you're greeted on both sides by an 11-story building, I'm not sure that that's exactly what we want to be doing as a city. But that's essentially what we would be doing if we adopted the ordinance as it's proposed, or the zoning map as it's proposed.
Did you have any thoughts about what Mr. Freeze wrote in his memo? He did treat of this a little bit.
Well,
I mean, the fact that basically folks in the county are already going to feel like they don't recognize the demarcation like we would in terms of county versus city. And the county is going to be more, it's going to be taller in the future than it is now likely. And so I'm not sure people are going to be able to really tell the difference coming from the county to the city.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more pressure on the county to build up with their development areas, like only, 4 or 5% of the county, and it's pressure on them as well. So I think they're going to see a lot more development there as well. So, and it's mainly around, I guess, it's Crozet along the urban ring and along 29 North Court is kind of, generally speaking, their growth areas. So.
well, but if we look at our entrance corridors, we look at Fifth Street extended. Does anybody seriously think that there is going to be a whole lot of 10-story buildings built in the county on the other side of the other side of the interstate? If we look at Barracks Road, does anybody seriously think that folks on the other side of the bypass, that those residential neighborhoods are suddenly going to give way to 8 and 10, 11-story buildings?
What, I mean, do you have any ideas on to address?
Well, I mean, if we say CX5, if you want to keep the current nomenclature, CX5 would allow 5 and up to 7 stories. And by the way, Mr. Freeze, maybe you can help me on this. My sense of things is that almost any building that would be able to be built in a CX8 zone would end up, or could end up, being a 10-story building.
If they sought the affordable housing bonus. But
Or if they're to be required to either pay the bonus or put the affordable units there. If it's going to be a residential building, it's going to be, they're going to be able to build it to 10 stories. It's not really an 8-story building at that point.
So they're able to. So the affordable housing bonus to get those additional 2 stories comes into play if they lower the AMI to 50%, right? So you don't get the bonus for doing the base requirement of 60% of AMI. That you're required to do. 60% of AMI, 10% of units. Then if you go down to 50% of AMI, that's where you get the bonus.
Do we have a sense of what the cost is to the developer of a 60% AMI unit as opposed to a 50% AMI unit?
I don't have it off the top of my head. Now, our consultant has identified that as readily achievable. So,
And RKG had numbers.
yeah, our
I
consultant
don't
does,
remember what they
RKG.
were.
I don't remember the exact numbers. I could look them up.
But I'm not going to say it's not readily achievable. It's probably readily achievable
What is readily achievable?
to get that bonus,
Oh.
to go down to 50% of AMI,
Okay.
if the numbers work out.
What do you mean if the numbers work out?
If the project is financially feasible to begin with.
To
right?
lower it, to get the bonus, then if that's financially feasible,
Right.
a developer could ask for that. But what I hear Lloyd saying, and maybe I'm missing it, but you are concerned about the aesthetics of entering the city at the various entrance corridors with a 10 or 12-story building versus,
I am bothered by the notion that at every entrance to the city, we will have guard towers.
okay.
That's what it's gonna look like and
Okay.
feel like.
Okay, so it's the aesthetics.
So,
Yeah, in a sense, but
Yeah,
more
you know
sort of
what I'm
urban
saying?
design
Yes.
kind of a concern.
Okay, all right, okay, I hear you.
so Lord, I guess at this point, I'm trying to compromise, find solution. Would you be comfortable with like maybe the, is it the Architectural Review Board?
BAR.
VAR, I'm sorry, yeah, to review certain heights, or what would make you
Well,
feel?
One of the things that we were hoping to accomplish with this zoning rewrite was to eliminate the number of stages of expensive reviews that developers have to go through to get to a project, recognizing that whenever we impose another level of review there, we're imposing costs that end up affecting eventually tenants. And so I'm not sure that that's the answer either. I mean, at least one answer would be, instead of making everything CX8 or NX10, actually the NX10 Barracks Road, if it were set back a ways from the road, wouldn't offend me. It's the sense that we're getting, that I'm getting, that on, for example, Ivy Road, we're going to have a 10-story building right on the edge of the sidewalk. And that sidewalk is obviously 8 or 10 feet at most from the edge of the street. And if that's done on the other side of the street, and if that is done on other parcels in that area.
Like a 2117 you're talking about?
Yeah. And we do that at every entrance into the city. We do it at Long Street. We do it, I guess Monticello Avenue is the only entrance that isn't going to be treated that way, but every other entrance to the city is going to get treated that way. And
Is it more dense than other dense parts of the city? In other words, we have that type of, like at the various NX locations, and
part
we
of
have
my-
other places that are as dense under the new zoning, right? But
It's less an issue of density for people and more a sense of, I mean, if we want to be downtown Roslyn, that's what that looks and feels like. I don't want Charlottesville to be downtown Roslyn. And the more I've thought about it and the more I've tried to listen to the people who have talked about sort of what makes Charlottesville Charlottesville, I don't want to get overly sentimental about trying to hold on to the way things were 50 years ago, but there's a piece of it that resonates with me that says if you allow people to build buildings to the edge of the lot, and you don't require any kind of setbacks, and then they end up getting waivers to be able to build higher, and you end up with, I think, a likely outcome that we're going to look back and after a while and say, why did we approve that? Just as we're now saying to West Main Street, why did City Council approve that?
So, and I understand that, so I think that, and I understand we want to maybe, reduce the number of steps for approval and things, but maybe for certain locations or certain heights that maybe it does necessitate review from the BAR or something. Particularly if it's a concern, I really hadn't thought about it,
BAR or the,
Can I note on the entrance corridors, so each of these, for the most part, are entrance corridors. They're reviewed by the Entrance Corridor Review Board, which is the Planning Commission, right? You guys have witnessed them switching hats.
Right.
So it's the ERB, and there was a proposal early on when we were working on the draft zoning ordinance to eliminate the entrance corridors for exactly the reason stated, right? It's another step in the process, another cost imposed on development. And ultimately, the Planning Commission did make the decision that the value they saw in having that design review on the entrance corridors outweighed, in their minds, the cost that it imposed on development projects, and so they opted to retain the entrance corridors within the zoning ordinance. So those are still in there. We have the Entrance Corridor Review Board. We would have to update the guidelines associated with those entrance corridors to reflect the different building types. Right now, those corridors reflect the strip malls that we see in some places, the parking lots and stuff like that. Those design guidelines would need to reflect more urban scale buildings.
And Lloyd, just to step back for a second, just for clarity on the conversation, the entrance corridors, I think they go, there's the area where you technically enter the city, but they go much deeper than just that technically, correct?
Yeah.
So is your concern with Lloyd just about those direct entrances around the city-county border, or are you thinking about the broader entrance corridor, for example, like Monticello or East High go along that whole road, like?
Well, the issue is, I mean, to a certain extent, it is a problem of sort of coming from a low area and suddenly you're in an area where all the buildings are 100 feet plus. And it may be that if the first few places along, let's say on 5th Street or something, were CX5, and then it works up to CX8 later on, maybe that mitigates the problem to some extent. I also have just sort of a general concern philosophically that where we are headed with this ordinance is losing sight of the fact, and I've said this before in another context, Charlottesville is known in part for the University of Virginia, but the university is known through UNESCO because of its architecture, not because of its engineering school. And we have chosen, the university has chosen to locate the architecture school on the arts grounds, not adjoining the engineering school. And my concern as I'm thinking about what we're going to end up with, and what this, frankly, some of the proposals I've seen recently, is that we are maximizing capacity as an engineering problem rather than as an art problem. And we end up with no setbacks, with no step backs, with building to the max, with waivers from those dimensional constraints that we have imposed, all in an effort to put more people into a smaller space. And we end up with things that, we end up at least the potential for designs that we would not necessarily have the ability to restrain or constrain, that are simply going to be, artless. And I would like to think that we would keep someplace in our zoning ordinance some opportunities or some incentives or even some requirements that people pay more attention to how things are going to look. And what I see is maximizing capacity, and I don't see any sense of grace to a lot of the things that are being proposed, and that concerns me. I don't think that our need for an additional, I'll just use an example, if you want to take 2117 Ivy Road, which is talking about wanting to put up 600 students, I don't know that if we said, no, we'll only let you put in 400 in there, and we're going to put some dimensional constraints in there, and we're going to require some step backs, and whatever other things we can require. Maybe an architect could say, okay, with that, we could do the following things. We could put in more street trees. I don't know what the answers might be, but when we incentivize building everything to the max, what we're likely to get is everything built to the max. And I don't think that our housing shortage is so acute that it matters greatly to the satisfaction of the demand, whether 2117 Ivy Road contains 400 students but has the freedom to look better than it does with 600, or whether the Verve, instead of having 1,500 students, maybe only houses 1,000, but has the freedom to do things that, or where we have the ability, in essence, to require them to do things that would have some more graceful impact on the neighborhood. And my concern is that we've gone so far in one direction that we are not allowing really the countervailing impulse.
I missed the connection, what you were saying about the A school and the engineering school and its location.
It's not a location, well, okay, it is a location thing in a sense, but what I'm saying is architecture is, when it is done the way that I think most architects would like to say that they are doing it, it's an art.
Yeah.
It is not simply how many people can we cram into a box.
So even if at those entrance corridors, if we have some, say, even if they're tall, but they're nice looking, or they can be designed, you're just concerned with the height itself.
Yeah, I think so. And it may be the height as a transition from, another height of buildings on the other side of the city or the county line. I just have the sense that for every entrance corridor, save one, save Monticello Avenue, we are going to basically take away the power of the Entrance Corridor Review Board to say very much at all about the massing of a building.
Okay, and I understand that. I'm trying
And we're
to.
going to end up with an ugly entrance to the city every time except on Monticello Avenue.
Right, and so, James, is there any way that, something that we can do to address that with changing the guidelines or something? So, I mean,
So, I'm gonna, first off, I need some clarity on the powers of the ERB to affect massing. Because I was under the impression, I didn't see anything that limited their ability to do so, so I'm asking for some clarity on that.
Massing would be a valid consideration.
Massing would be I'm sorry, could you?
Massing would be an issue that could be considered.
So the ERB would be able to consider massing, and so would be able to impose step backs and those types of things.
Yes, but I also think that sidebar we were having is, to the mayor's point, could there be the density bonus could be tied to increased units, but also tied to greater setbacks, which could address the massing issue that I think is being raised here. So, for example, if you're going to increase the number of affordable units to increase the number of units, could that be accompanied by setbacks, which would allow for the addressing of what I think is some of the massing issues that really is the topic of this discussion?
Well, and I think I want to be, maybe I'm using the term incorrectly, but we use the term massing at one level to mean how do we make a very large building look less large? Because in fact, as I understand it, the Entrance Review Board does not have the power to say, you've got to make this building smaller. Isn't that right?
I think that, Mr. Mayor, I think there are two things here that create some maybe vagueness. One is, as Mr. Freese has indicated, there is a desperate need to update all the guidelines. And the guidelines often can address those issues as to the parameters of what the ARB can do. Separately, I think the answer is that if you should clarify to the extent that you want to, outside of the guidelines, what exactly the ARB can do within the confines of this ordinance. And so I would say that as Jay has indicated, they could conceivably deal with those issues now, and if the developer or the property owner doesn't like the way they dealt with it, then they can appeal to you all as council. Or, if you want that certainty from council, that you want to avoid either massing, or you want to have step backs or something else, not forcing a developer to go through a separate process, as in with the ARB in terms of a potential appeal then to council, then you should fix that in the ordinance itself right now. To the question of what is massing, I guess just for purposes of council, all looking at the same thing, if you look at page 2-23, which shows the CX districts and shows 0 setbacks. I mean, to me, the issue is not only setbacks, it may be step backs once on the building itself. And then also particularly on CX8 on page 2-29. So you have a policy issue, you have a legal issue, and but basically your legal issue is one in which it would be helpful to us to have greater clarity from council as to those things that you absolutely want, those things where that we should articulate better the discretion of the ARB, and then you have waiting out there once you finish this effort, the guidelines.
So as an example, one of the things we clarified with the BAR's powers is that they specifically, I believe this power already existed and is clearly articulated in their guidelines, but we specifically articulated within the ordinance that they have the ability to reduce height and massing. And so I believe what is being said is that we could clarify the exact same point for the ERB.
Yes, that's correct.
But what I would say is that in doing so, you already have heard from the development community, I'm sure, about the concerns they have with that approach relative to BAR. But my response to that is that's where the guidelines come into play. The more we can articulate and clearly state this is the goals of the city, this is the objective of the city in these districts to preserve these public interests in historic resources or in the entrance corridors, we want to very clearly articulate what those things are, because at the end of the day, the ERB and the BAR are bound to follow those guidelines in making their decisions. So all of this is about, our objective with the zone ordinance is to try to increase predictability. And so in those instances, within these districts where we have a special public interest, we would be aiming to address that issue of predictability within the guidelines.
Well, with our current planning commission and ERB, I think it would end up looking like what's in this package, because, it's the same people influenced what's in the draft zoning ordinance that we have now, the things that are frustrating the mayor. And did that make any sense? In other words, with the current ERB, the
I see,
current planning
with the
commission
guidelines,
that we have.
the guidelines are adopted by the council.
Right. Okay. The guidelines would be adopted. I see. Okay.
They go through the process, they go through
Okay.
the planning commission, then they're adopted by council.
Because if it just was sort of like a, kind of loose sort of, we think this is,
Right.
which is
And that's the
sometimes what
problem.
I hear at the planning commission
Right.
meetings.
Yes.
You just basically end up with what the document we have here
Understood.
with the draft zoning ordinance, if those, the same individuals are participating. So, because this, as part of my, I guess, hesitation, Lloyd, is, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but it seems like that sort of, I shouldn't say the ship has sailed. The ship doesn't sail until we, let it leave port. But, when this was conceived with the planning commission and the consultants, they evidently wanted it to be packed as tight as possible because they didn't make any. I guess there's the permissiveness to be as expansive as possible, But if we get the guidelines right, maybe that will, help mitigate some of the concerns.
But does expanse mean,
The way this is drawn, the way this is right now,
Right.
Leah, is the dials are pretty far up, to use the
right,
metaphor,
absolutely.
for these buildings to be built right up to the edge and as flat and straight as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, if that, that philosophical point seems like it was conceded a long time ago.
Well,
But does ex-
by others, but not by
does-
us.
But does expansive have to be obtrusive?
No, and I think that's what James is saying with these guidelines, that if the guidelines are set up and we have a chance to weigh in on them, then we can direct the planning commission and thus the ERB about what our expectations would be for step backs and things like that. But that sounds like that could be, a lot of effort to pull that off, and would be, it's
But
not
if
something
it-
that's going to happen tomorrow.
But if it were in the ordinance, if it could be, if the concerns that we hear the mayor talking about could be delineated in the ordinance, then I, the developer, would know before I go through all of this to present a development, only to be said, well, here's your development, but now you've got 5 more things to do. If I knew from the beginning I had 5 more things to do, I could say, I'm not doing it, whether I could afford it or not, or I am going to do the development and the 5 additional things because they're here. So what I hear, James, can I call you James? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
May I call you, not can I? So what I hear James and our legal team over here saying is, if there is a way that we can put it in here that's acceptable to everyone here, then any developer anywhere will know what they have to do in order to build at an entrance corridor, because that's the concern that's on the floor now before we get to all the individual streets. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'm just saying that I think that coming up with what those rules are and making them specific and agreeing on them is the task of many different meetings. And that is a large task to try to pull off.
Well, so let me ask then the legal question, because I thought I understood from earlier meetings that the planning commission, of course I wasn't on the planning commission at the time, but I was watching, I was there in the room, that we were being told, that the planning commission was being told there are limits on what you can do at the ECRB stage. You can't backtrack from what council has already approved, for example. And so if council has already approved an SUP that has certain requirements, and then at the entrance corridor review board process, people say, well, that's going to look ugly. The ECRB has no authority to contradict what council has already done. Now, maybe the answer is that we get out of the SUP business and then we leave everything to the ECRB. But what I heard this council saying a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 meetings ago, was that you wanted more SUP review, not less SUP review. There was an expression by at least 3 members to say that anything over 5 stories ought to be an SUP. And if that's the result, then we get back to the same problem of, if we're going to be granting an SUP, then we're essentially taking the power away from the ECRB, because they won't have the authority to contradict what we've already said. And I just think this is, you may be right that it's a subject for another meeting, but I don't think that the answer is that we go ahead and we say, right now, let's give everybody the right to build 8 or 11 stories until we figure this thing out. Maybe we say we make all the entrance corridors CX5 until we figure things out. But that we don't start by giving them authority that we're then going to have to take away from them.
I don't really have a problem with that. I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be this process of developing the guidelines. And that is gonna take time by the professionals. And then they could come to us and say, this is what we recommend for the entrance corridors. And if in the meantime, to sort of get this thing over the finish line, we wanna reduce, some of these places, like you've got NX 10, like going up
Barracks Road Shopping Center.
up 29, for example. So I don't know, cut it in half for the time being. I'm not sure, but
And I'll just say, I think NX 10 for the middle of the Barracks Road Shopping Center wouldn't bother me, but if we're simply saying NX 10 for the entire Barracks Road Shopping Center to where it could be built right at 10 stories or 13 stories to high, right on Barracks Road, separated only by the sidewalk, it seems to me that that's probably not a result that we would like.
yeah, and that would go up all the way to past
One
hydraulic.
consequence of eliminating all setbacks and eliminating step backs and eliminating all these other things is,
I mean, that would, the NX 10 goes all the way north up past Seminole Court and Hillsdale Drive and all of that.
I just want to clarify one point on this is we do have the streetscape requirement, which would require both the greenscape with street trees and sidewalk. And on a street of that scale, I think that comes up to 15 feet or something from the edge of street pavement before you get to building.
okay, so you get 15 feet of sidewalk and tree.
Yeah. And I don't remember exactly what the number is. I know at its narrowest, on the smallest local street, that requirement produces an 11-foot width total. So, and that street, I know it's greater. I just don't remember what it is off the top of my head.
And one of the reasons that I started thinking about this and started thinking, frankly, a little more passionately about it than I had before, was that after the discussion of 2117 Ivy Road a couple weeks ago, I went and looked at the university's plan for the Ivy Road development. And what struck me was that there was a June report, and maybe it was a June Board of Visitors meeting that it was reporting to, but the June 2nd sticks in my mind, a report where they showed the expected design of the building that would be at the Copley end of things, if I'm interpreting the overall design correctly. And I remember thinking, first of all, it doesn't look anything like Monticello and the Rotunda, but it has some connection in style, brick and things like that. And it looks like it would be a really beautiful building. And I'm thinking, somebody there has a value that they're placing on beauty that we are not placing in anything we're doing here tonight. And that bothers me. And I would like to see, I don't want to be the arbiter of what constitutes beauty, but I would like to give architects perhaps a freer rein to do something beautiful than simply how many people can we cram in here.
Well, I think the tension is always just going to be, I think with the guidelines, to me, it seems like the relevant things that they would incorporate in a different way, I guess, would be building materials and step backs. Other than that, I don't really know what you could do. The only other alternative is to have some sort of discretionary process and having somebody be an arbiter of deciding, is this aesthetically good enough or not?
That
And
is what we
that-
have today.
Right.
The entrance corridors is a discretionary design review process that looks at materials and step backs and articulations on the building and the size and style of windows and other openings and those types of things to arrive at an aesthetic whole at the end.
Right, with a somewhat constrained purview and ability to decide, what the scope of that is going to mean. At least that's my understanding.
Well, again, that purview is one things we discussed we can define within the ordinance.
Right, but I think I don't know. I mean, to me, it doesn't seem, I feel like in those guidelines, things around step backs in building materials, I feel like could be, I guess, further elaborated in a way that's not even necessarily in tension with increasing height or density by right. But beyond that, I'm just not really sure what we're going to, I mean, the market is not going to produce every single building a uniquely defining and interesting
No, of course not.
piece of architecture. But I don't know, I mean, in terms of those guidelines, what are you thinking in terms of building material, like a certain amount of brick, or like step back where at the street level you're talking about a certain height, and then behind that you're talking about a higher height? I mean, do you have any sense of what those design review parameters would even be? Or is that something?
I have not thought about that. What concerns me is that as I see the way that this zoning ordinance has changed, I think, I mean, at one point, of course, we currently have a provision specifically for step backs. We have removed that provision in this draft. Would it be clear after we had removed step backs, would it be clear that that the ECRB could say, oh, we're going to require step backs now? Once we'd removed them from the statute? I don't know. Our legal experts?
Can you remind me why it came
I
out?
think, again, the issue is going to be the delegation of authority to give to the ECRB. So if they're, and what their guidelines. I mean, it can't be sort of an arbitrary decision by the ECRB. Get the initials. It's going to have to be articulated in the guidelines or in the ordinance. My recommendation, again, is that you set that framework fairly clearly in the ordinance, and then the guidelines would flow from those.
Just to perhaps add to that just a bit, there's been a great deal of discussion about predictability. The best predictability is an ordinance provision.
Sure.
And so if step backs are desired as a way of addressing this massing issue, just to use that term, then inserting that provision, greater setbacks in corridor structures, for example, that combination, that will ensure predictability, which could address some of the concerns by the developer community about a long, expensive process like SUPs. And at the same time, council would have a relatively high degree of certainty that its wishes will be met, and it would also minimize a situation where you're hearing a lot of appeals, perhaps, as you would in a BAR context.
So step backs now in the current draft look like they're more geared for when you have transitions.
They are. That's how it's set up in the current draft. The existing zoning ordinance, Councilor Pinkston, I think you were asking where they exist in the current zoning ordinances for the downtown area. And we had proposed back in the August draft of bringing them back into the proposed ordinance. Planning Commission, in their review, particularly led by Commissioner Schwartz, who is also a member of the BAR, his recommendation, which ultimately swayed the remainder of the commission, was to not have the step backs in the downtown district, but instead rely on the BAR to make individualized decisions about various sites. And in that instance, I think in particular he was thinking about our recent experience with the project at the Artful Lodger site, where they had originally incorporated step backs into the site. It made the project difficult to build, to move forward with, and so they ended up coming back and getting a special use permit amendment so that they could reduce those step backs. And that was ultimately the point that Commissioner Schwartz in that instance was referring to.
But would that be essentially whenever the BAR is involved, they could just sort of make a sort of just a statement, I think you need to step back here versus there, or would
So they're going to
With
be
the
guided by,
guidelines.
yeah, they have to be
Okay.
guided by the guidelines, the intent of that historic district, right? And
so there's a lot more work to be done on all of that?
always,
Yeah, okay. So again, it's sort of, trying to repair the canoe as we go down the river or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, so Lloyd, it sounds like then for other places in the city that have the higher density, you've got some concerns about massing and step backs and so on, but your specific thing that you're focused on tonight is really the entrance corridors.
Well,
It's more sort of like, this is the entrance to our city, this is the perimeter of our city. When you come across, we want it to look decent and not,
welcome to Charlottesville.
But,
Yeah.
but, in all fairness, right now, many of our entrance corridors are not, and we're doing pretty good, are not ideal.
Oh, no, absolutely.
going up 29 is horrible.
Yeah. So, yeah.
He just doesn't want it to look worse. How about that?
Well, and let me, in response to the earlier comment, there are other places where we have talked about CX8, for example, where if council from a month ago is serious about saying anything over 5 stories ought to be an SUP, then, we're basically talking about, because an SUP is a rezoning, we're basically talking about taking everything above a CX5 or whatever, and putting it into the SUP category. And so I'm not sure, and that would include CX5, CX8 along Preston Avenue. That would include a number of other places as well, where we've designated things. And of course, that we know that along the Preston corridor is an area that has been subject to a lot of concern. My particular issue that I was thinking about and raising it on was the entrance corridors, but I think that the same logic would apply in a lot of other places where we've got CX5 or CX8, and I guess it really is CX8 is the only category that crops up with any frequency.
So I'm trying to figure out how we can resolve this, so we, figure out, if we can try to find a compromise. If not, we gotta, figure out something, because we have a lot of streets and things. And, what you brought up is very important, but I think that it's a couple of different ways I heard we could address it. And I just need to, know if that's something that we need to do now, or, I know we can't do it all now because of the timing and the work that has to be involved with it. I'm just trying to figure out what can we do now to address, if we can address his concerns now.
Well, to that end, I'm having a difficult time remembering what I said a month ago, so help me out.
So
please.
But what you said earlier might address Lloyd's concerns.
Yeah.
So could you say that again?
I'll try.
Okay, go.
But I guess what I'm hearing you say, Lloyd, is maybe as an interim measure is we cut the building height in half or something until we get these proper guidelines in place, and then we revisit it. Like we've said, this maybe calling it a living document is too extreme, but we need to be able and willing to update the zoning ordinance much more frequently than we have. Dropping back to the whole question of SUPs for anything above a certain height, I guess that was being driven partly, Michael, because of concerns with small businesses and CX areas.
Well,
And we got some feedback by email about why that's a bad idea.
Yeah, well, my understanding of what that conversation had been was my concern, one, I don't think a discretionary process means that an upzoning did not occur and is the worst thing in the world is a trade-off, but I don't think there's something we need to 100% eliminate. I think we're drastically reducing the number of discretionary processes versus where we are today, which is generally good. Getting rid of them 100% versus, scaled back 90% to me is not make much of a functional difference in terms of the ability to provide supply into the market. My concern was primarily around areas where we have competing policy interests in areas like Preston Avenue, Rose Hill, where the scale of investment coming in when you're talking about above a certain height with unlimited density is going to create what will be experienced by a lot of people, I fear, as gentrification, displacement, and if there's any way to have, in some areas, still a discretionary process that will provide those neighborhoods an opportunity to have some voice in a very significant change in terms of the amount of capital investment coming into the community. What came from that was that advertising 5 stories across the city for advertisement purposes, but my understanding is that that would not be blanket throughout the entire city, because my concern is really around specific corridors and areas rather than saying everywhere. I mean, quite frankly, I think up Barracks and 29, having by right heights that are going to 8, 10 stories is totally reasonable, especially if you had design controls that are looking at just very basic, setbacks or something like that to address the concern you raised. And that's an area where there's not really displacement or gentrification pressure. So that's where I was coming from. That's my understanding of where we were at, but maybe that was off.
That's hopeful, thank you. That was pre-turkey, so.
Pre-carbs.
You got any thoughts?
I'm concerned, like Michael, and I think the rest of us around the dais are concerned about displacement and gentrification in certain areas. So whatever we need to do to preserve that to the best of our ability is where I am.
Okay, so that would affect, that's part of the discussion we had a month ago, dealing with Preston Avenue and so on, which led to the suggestion that everything over 5 stories should have an SUP attached to it. We then, of course, got a lot of feedback from folks saying, hey, that's going in the wrong direction. And what I'm trying to figure out is, and I guess to bring it back to the specific question that I was asking before about the entrance corridors, and also would also apply to Preston Avenue and a few other places, that if we said, at least at this point, well, okay, let's take the entrance corridor alone, because there is an entrance corridor review board. If we were thinking of empowering the entrance corridor review board with certain powers that I have been under the impression that they don't have at the moment, then maybe we say, let's make these entrance corridors for the moment CX5, and figure in the next 6 months we will sort out both what the entrance corridor review board ordinance ought to look like, and to what extent we're willing to delegate power to them to decide some of these issues that and then we can go back and say, all right, given the powers we've given to them, we're willing to allow for more height than we were willing to say without those controls. I mean,
Is that something that can happen legally, Jay?
I believe it can, and we will also, in the interim, do some additional legal research on that question. And I believe we have a closed meeting set for next Monday, and we can present those findings at that time.
Okay.
Okay.
So can you restate what,
Well,
so
okay.
you're saying basically for the time being,
What I would say is,
we're going to cut it in half or some number in terms of the stories?
that the entrance corridors, if we're going to change the zoning map right now, which clearly, I mean, if we're going to adopt this thing, it's going to be with a new zoning map, so that's got to be, that we make the entrance corridors that are currently CX8 and so on, we make them, say, cap them at CX5, and then figure that in the next, in the first 6 months of 2024, we will come out with a new entrance corridor review board ordinance, making clear the kinds of powers we want them to have, making clear what powers we want to keep to ourselves, and to see if we can come up with a way of articulating all of this that gives as much certainty as possible, but also, frankly, the ability of somebody with some greater artistic and architectural sensibilities to figure out what they can do to make something look prettier.
So you said CX8 to CX5. What about NX10?
Well, at this point, when, as I understand it, the NX10 designation would include the ability to have a 13-story building built 15 feet away from Barracks Road. I mean, if you're going to put the NX10 in the middle of the shopping center where it's, you know, a couple hundred yards away from other things, that the ability of that to be an imposing guard tower on the edge of the city is substantially mitigated. My understanding is that the designation of NX10 would apply to the entire
Yeah, and it
thing that
goes,
we now know as Barracks Road Shopping Center.
well, and it also goes all the way up by the bypass, past hydraulic, you know, on up to the old giant, I guess it was a giant
Yeah, but I
shopping.
mean, that's not like a residential area where you have, you know, kids, families walking on the sidewalks there. It's where we want dense commercial development, isn't it? I mean,
Well, maybe we say if you're going to build a 13-story building, maybe you ought to have 25 feet setback. Give it a little more room on the edge.
right, and I understand. And
But we
so-
don't have that in the ordinance now.
Right, and what I'm hearing is that, you know, we capped that at 5, it's 5, and within the first 6 months, we try to come up with some guidelines. And what I want to ask James or Sam, is that reasonable? Because it's a lot we have put off to 2024, you know.
There's a lot, and I'm actually tasked with working on my work plan for actually the next 6 months right now.
So we have
Which has a lot
available-
in it. So I'm not, I wouldn't commit to 6 months, but I think
Okay.
we would have to identify a reasonable amount of time in which we
Yeah.
do that.
So we have available NX3, NX5, NX8, and NX10. And you're saying take CX8 down to CX5.
Well, if you want to take NX10 down to NX5 on the same principle, again, expecting that we will revisit it once we figure out what our rules are, I could live with that. Ms. Pandak?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, two points, just maybe to finesse the comments that have been made with respect to grace or how the building looks. I think you're looking more for something that fits within the concept in the zoning statutes of harmonious community. And so if we could focus on that phrasing is, I think, a more appropriate phrasing that captures the concepts you're talking about, but I think are more within what we would be looking for in phrasing it in the ordinance. So I just pass that along to sort of frame up how you.
I'll accept that as a friendly amendment.
Yes, sir, thank you.
And it's true, because what I'm looking for is something that is harmonious with other design in Charlottesville. And so, yeah, anyway.
I'll just say I don't disagree that there's a role for the guidelines to be strengthened and clarified in a way that could be constructive. I just feel like we're outside of BAR control of already existing buildings. I just don't know how we're ever going to legislate for aesthetics, because the market is just always going to go to what's the cheapest construction. So I feel like all we could do is something around setbacks for an area closest to the sidewalk or street and something around building materials. And even then, the market is going to default to the cheapest way to achieve that. And maybe that's better with those minimal guidelines, but it's not going to be that different. And I certainly think I obviously think there's some areas where reducing the by right height while still having a discretionary process to go above it is appropriate. I still feel like doing that blanket across all of our entrance corridors to just cut it in half is too draconian a response to the concern. And if we go in that direction, I think it would be valuable to have a discretionary process to still go above 5 stories, even in that interim, because who knows what will ultimately happen there. But I mean, take a site like the Kmart site. If things changed and if someone wanted to build, a large residential mixed-use building there, like, we would want that there, and there's no displacement risk. There's no aesthetic impact to an existing community, and so it seems too draconian a response.
To just cut it in half,
Yes.
even
blanket.
though it's like an interim sort of step. You're saying if we do that, we should include the flexibility of an SUP.
That would be my opinion at a minimum if you're going to go in that direction, because I think, we say 6 months, who knows how long it will take. And even if it was 6 months exactly, to me, it wouldn't seem unfeasible at all that a project could come along that was primarily residential and infill development. Again, not saying it seems likely to happen right now, but the Kmart site is an example. If you actually had residential built there, I don't think we would want to cap it at 5 stories and say there's not even a way you could go above 5 stories.
And the reason not to just go ahead and say, fine, 10 stories there, or 13, which is where you get to with the bonuses, to me, comes back to the fact that we have, in many cases, no setback requirement, and in fact, not allowed to have more than, say, 10 feet in setback. And we end up, in essence, forcing people to build to the margins.
I'm just going to, there is an urban design principle behind that about promoting a more walkable environment. And so if we have an opportunity to dig into that, I'd have a lot to say about going beyond that 10 feet.
I understand that there are reasons why, and my concern, and I don't know how to create the legislative process here that allows for all of this. I just don't want to be in a situation where, because we have a maximum 10-foot setback, we are requiring a system, requiring a design that has everything built to the edges.
So, Michael, you're suggesting SUP, and so, and Lord, you had suggested that maybe cap it at, CS5 until we can design some guidelines. Would you support special use permit until we can come up with those guidelines?
Well, I mean, frankly, if we were to do that, it would be a recognition that nothing would happen between now and the time we were going to pass what those guidelines would be, because the lead time on preparing some of these projects with SUPs and everything else is significant. I don't know that it matters a whole heck of a lot, but if you're worried about, if we put it in with CX5 and somehow we never get around to touching it again, maybe the SUP process is the way out.
Well, I think that if we work with Sam and James, said this is something that to put on council's to-do list, type of thing. I think we'll get it done. We've been moving on the project, so.
I would venture to say that we need to be mindful of the idea that we're probably talking about within the next 12 months. Just thinking about with the workload that exists today, and this not being on the work plan that he is working to produce for me, it would be the next fiscal year as to when we would be identifying. I'm assuming that I'm not too far away from where you're thinking,
No, you're not.
because of other things that we know that you all want to take a look at. Short-term rentals is going to require some time and effort, as well as we just have our regular things that we're
Sure.
also trying to get done too.
Understand.
And I'll just say, I mean, even that may seem too optimistic to me, just
It's probably fair.
because.
Just trying to be optimistic.
Well, I mean, again, I'm true, like, I mean, you just look at the small area plan for 10th and Page, which is top priority, things around floodplain, the fact that we're gonna get a flood of applications coming in, once any changes take effect. I mean,
And just the challenge of implementation of what you do pass.
Right.
Well, I think part of what we're just facing here is this is, where the rubber meets the road in terms of, I don't want to say overly idealistic. That's not how I feel. I think that this is a good document, and I really appreciate all the effort that the Planning Commission and others have put into it. But I think when, we're tasked with being the elected officials to say, okay, what is this really going to look like in practice? There's definitely some, the things that you're bringing up, Lloyd, and the things that Michael brought up about, commercial spaces and smaller businesses being run out. I think we're just facing the fact that when this is actually enacted, the repercussions aren't completely known, and I just think it's going to be, I don't want to use the word messy, but it's going to be complicated in terms of how we roll this out in ways that minimize harm and maximize, the good effects, which is what we want here. So,
Well, so, okay, I mean, I've stated my position. I don't know whether anybody else agrees with me.
I mean, I see Michael's point. It does feel a little draconian to just sort of cut everything in half. And everything that we do here, I feel an obligation or some sort of responsibility to the Planning Commission and the others who've thought about this for a very long time. But, I mean, I guess I see your points, Lloyd, and I think that, maybe the middle way here of, CX or NX5 at the entrance corridors with the plan of getting guidelines within the next 6 to 12 months, and then an SUP process in the meantime, maybe that's the best compromise. What do you think, Juan?
Yes, I agree with that.
I think 6 months might be a little ambitious. I think you need to.
We're taking a year now.
I think a year to 18 months. is
Well,
good.
that's exactly what I was going to say.
But the SUP option gives us some wiggle room
Yes,
around that.
and that addresses Michael, because if in month 16, this great opportunity is presented to do something with the Kmart spot,
Well.
listen, come on now. Then we don't want to be locked in where that can't happen. That's what Michael is saying. And it may not be the Kmart spot, but that's just a good example. And so I think we have to make sure that we don't lock ourselves in to, if an opportunity presents itself, we're so boxed in, we cannot take advantage of the opportunity. Because change is hard, change is difficult, because it's unknown. And so we're doing something for the good of everyone. However, in doing that, there is the unknown, and you don't want anyone to feel any more disenfranchised than they do at this current moment. Right? Yes, Mr. Payne, is that correct? We don't want anyone to feel disenfranchised, do we?
no.
There we go.
So Lloyd, are you talking specifically, if we did this, it would only be in the areas designated formally as entrance corridors?
That's what my first comments were directed toward, I don't know whether, if we were to look at all of the other places that are currently designated as CX8, and some of those places are adjacent to neighborhoods that we have some interest in trying to protect, that would be something that would be, I mean, that's a different species of the same concern. But for right now, the specific concern of that I had raised about the entrance corridors, yes, it would just be referring to those.
Yeah,
I don't remember right now all the other places that are designated 8 stories, or of course 8 becomes 11, or 10 stories, which becomes 13. So, anyway.
And the reason I ask is, does it make sense to expand this concept to those other locations? This idea of we're going to tighten up our rules for reviewing these projects, and we're going to have an SUP as a way to work around that in the meantime. If something comes up, does that make sense to expand into other areas?
I think it might. I would add that I still have the goal of reducing the number of times when an SUP is necessary, not increasing it. And my initial reaction to things a month ago was that the proposal that anything over 5 stories would have an SUP attached to it, my initial concern was that was going in the wrong direction. It's still a concern, but as a short-term thing, until we figure out more what we want to do, I guess I'd have to live with it.
And that was, again, another kind of, stopgap or compromise until we can really kind of work it out as this. So, so.
So basically, we're saying CX8, NX8, and NX10, we're not going to do except with a special use permit until we get more clarity on the rules?
I think we would have to say, we'd have to give it something they could do without, we have to allow them to do something. If we say we'll make everything CX5 or NX5 until we solve these other problems, I think that would keep us legal.
But if a project wanted to go above that, they could use the SUP process to do that.
The only concern I have about that is that I'm sure that our lawyers would say there had better be some guardrails on what's allowed through the SUP process.
Well, maybe
We can't just say anything and everything comes in by SUP, 20 stories or whatever.
the default position would be that by an SUP, they could get access to what's already in the document here.
So if I could just say, if council were to implement this on a citywide level, we would leave, for example, the NX8 in place, and then in the height section of NX8, it would offer a base height, and then it would say by SUP up to this height, 8. So if it's NX8, it would say base height 5 stories with SUP up to 8 stories, something along those lines.
Something like that.
And so that's how it would work. And so depending on what district you're in, that number would change, right? So if it was NX10, then it would say 5 with SUP up to 10. So that's how it would be implemented.
I would think that would work.
Right. So that's your guardrails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, okay.
We've
And
just-
if I might, Mr. Mayor, just a couple additional sort of guardrails to what Mr. Freeze is indicating. You also probably would want to have criteria with respect to the increase in height that deals with issues such as streetscape or setback, step back.
Yeah.
All of those things as the issues that would be addressed as part of the SUP application. So
And I would add that SUPs also allow you to consider issues like massing and harmoniousness, which would also give you a bit of flexibility.
Okay. Do we have sort of a
Michael, how are you
tentative
feeling about
consensus
this?
here?
I mean, I don't think the design, I think the design guidelines will help a little bit, but there's a limit to what I will be able to legislate in terms of aesthetics. And again, I think there's clear areas where I would agree that framework of maintaining, say, CX10, but, you know, above a certain height triggers a special permit, makes sense to me. I just think it's...
CX5? You said CX10, which first of all doesn't exist, but.
NX10.
NX10, okay.
CX8, you know, above 5 stories to get to that CX8, you know, the special permit's triggered. As I've said, I think there's areas that make sense, but I still think it's too draconian to apply it either to the whole city or every entrance corridor, but.
Do you have any suggestions or thoughts about how to make it less draconian or less of a kludge?
What was that, kludge? I don't know if I've ever heard that word before.
Less of a just sort of hack?
I think the only way would be if there are specific corridors that other counselors have a specific aesthetic concern around, rather than all of them blanket, but.
You'd like to delineate them out, identify the entrance corridors, and then delineate out of those that are identified, which ones fit into the, you know, the what's his name, you know, before you are allowed to build up, before they go to the SUP process. You know what I'm saying? So if there were 5 entrance corridors and everyone felt 3 of them would not be as draconian as all 5 of them, then they would need to be delineated out in your mind.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, maybe for other counselors, all of them are. I'm just also thinking our entrance corridors are beyond just the strict county-city line. I mean, you know, they're going, in some cases, like, from that county city line, like, to downtown, and have a mix currently of, like, CX5, CX8, and some of
CPA all the way in, basically. is
Right.
another example.
I failed to mention this at the beginning, but we do have the interactive zoning map available to bring up on the screen if that would be helpful, and it shows things like the entrance corridors and historic districts and stuff like that.
I've got it here on my computer.
There you go.
Oh, well, you bring it up so we may see it. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that.
No, we
I
would
can
have
send
to-
you the link.
You're
You
not
want the
plugged
link?
in.
We would, a member of the consultant team would just share their screen and show it. if
Oh,
that's-
okay.
So I
if that's
wonder
of interest.
Could someone, would you kindly ask someone to share their screen, please? So I can,
I
so I,
think you've
you
done
know,
it.
I'm visual. Yeah, I'm the visual lady. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm with you. Keep going.
So if we could just turn on the entrance corridor layer. There you go.
Oh. How come you got that up already?
So Lloyd, one impact of that is going to be with JPA, right?
Yep.
And our desire to put more density there.
Now, most of that corridor is, in fact, that corridor, with the exception of the key intersections, is right now at CX5.
Okay, so it wouldn't,
It wouldn't affect you much.
could you go up to 29 North?
But you've still got the CX8s are.
Yeah, at the key, at the
Yeah.
intersections of Stadium and
So
Shamrock.
all of that is NX10 going up.
Yes.
And honestly, Lloyd, I think at the tip top up there, I don't think anyone's going to notice an NX10 building and be bothered by it at all.
Bless you.
Thank you.
So maybe to walk back a little bit, what do y'all, and again, trying to respect all the effort that the Planning Commission has put into this, what do y'all think about following the recommendations as they have them outlined in the document, the zoning ordinance, as well as on the map, except for the entrance corridors where we would do the five-story limit.
To me, that seems like, at least for me, the concerns I had, it's the exact, almost the reverse of kind of the concern I've had, where it seems silly to me, up 29, you would require that and block it, and then all along Rose Hill, in the Rose Hill neighborhood and 10th and Page neighborhood, it is allowed by right. I mean, it kind of seems like the reverse of what our
And
goal
just
ought to be.
To remember, the other tool in our toolbox that we proposed at one of our previous meetings is the core neighborhoods corridor overlay.
Right.
Which,
Right.
so that is another tool that is available. For example, it was initially proposed for Preston. It's also, obviously, Rose Hill would fall within the intent of that district.
Sure.
So they would be protected with the overlay, right?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Right.
Well, okay, so if we say we want, that we basically don't much care what happens on 29 North, I will say that I am still concerned about the fact that we have eliminated, and in fact are seemingly requiring building close to the edge. And maybe it's 15 feet, maybe it's 10 feet, I don't know what it is, but that just strikes me as being something that doesn't make sense up there.
So it depends on what environment you're trying to create at the street side, right? If you're aiming for, well, first off, let's get the numbers. I don't remember. Christie, could you tell us on at the largest scale, what is the streetscape requirement for the sidewalk in the greenscape zone?
Give me 2.
I'm going to presume seconds.
Yes.
And where is that found in the book?
It is in Division 4 on page 4-17. So on the most intense streets, so say your mixed use A and mixed use B streets, your clear walk zone is 7 feet, so that's your sidewalk, and your greenscape or your tree zone is 8 feet. So 15 feet in the most intense areas.
I did have it right.
Okay.
So that would be 15 feet from edge of pavement, from edge of the road pavement, and then your setback picks up from that point, wherever that point happens to lie.
So it's not like you're going to have a 6-foot sidewalk or 4-foot sidewalk
Right.
with a building coming right up beside it.
And really, the point here is that what happened with the standard on Main Street cannot possibly happen. The intention here is to not let that happen in the future.
As to the way it fronts onto Main Street,
Right. You have essentially a narrow sidewalk with no greens,
Yeah.
no green zone.
the problem that we hear more about from there is the absolute height next to West Haven.
That's on the other side, right? That's a transition issue.
Yeah.
But the how it addresses the street. But what we do want to do as the city builds up, which is ultimately the direction the plan and the zoning is moving in the direction of, as the city builds up, you want to create a walking environment that does have that sense of safety and comfort for pedestrians. And what the research shows, what urban design principles show, is that you do want your building fronting the sidewalk. You want
Eyes on the street type of thing.
eyes. You want eyes on the street. You want to create that visual interest for the pedestrian that comes from having the building right there, with transparency. Right, that's amongst the requirements. No blank walls facing on that sidewalk. Right, that's the other key rule. But the other rules, again, all these rules kind of work together in a system. We've put limits on the absolute width of buildings, and in order so with those widths, you're now creating breaks between buildings, right? So it's not a continuous frontage. Those breaks can be in the form of courtyards. We also have open space requirements and in various encouragements to create pedestrian zones, which basically creates a urban streetscape environment where you're coming down the street, you've got a wide sidewalk, you've got that building next to you that's providing that sense of safety and comfort, but then there are breaks in that open up into pedestrian zones, into courtyards and things like that as you go down the environment. So it's not a monotonous continuous wall. The design requirements that are built into the zoning ordinance are designed to create basically an interesting and engaging pedestrian environment, which then promotes walking, which is one of our primary goals here.
I guess my question, maybe it was just failure of imagination on my part, is to try to understand how those principles apply to a parcel fronting on 29 North.
Fronting on Route 29 North, yeah, I understand. And that, we'd work through, we'd have to work through that issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I believe that the zoning ordinance, and Christie or Lee, you're welcome to jump in if you have any thoughts on Route 29 in particular. But I think the ordinance offers us the tools we need to figure that out. But if either Lee or Christie have thoughts on Route 29 in particular.
Yeah, James, I'll just add that there is some flexibility for particularly instances like that, or areas, against the bypass that are more limited access, and how those streets get addressed. So there is an administrative flexibility there. Another way that if a particular street, so Route 29, there could be a line added to that street type table. That comes from your standards and design manual, those street types, but there could be a Route 29 table or line added to that table that has a specific streetscape for that particular road because it is so specific.
Yeah,
So
that's a good solution.
If we're looking at the book page, just an extra line on the chart on page 4-17.
Yep.
That's right.
I'm not sure what the right answer would be, but it just seems like 15 feet is not enough.
Right, it would be both a wider sidewalk and a wider greenscape zone.
Yeah.
So where do we stand on this entrance corridors?
Well, if we can come up with a way to, maybe it's what we were just talking about, a change to page 4-17 for 29 North, maybe that takes away some of my concern for that parcel. I still have the concern, particularly for Barracks Road, particularly for the entrance corridor coming in off Morey and Fontaine and all that area, and East High Street too, for that matter. And there, it's interesting. There are a lot of other things that people have complained about that they want us to address this evening that touch on this same basic idea. So, although I'll leave it at that. We'll talk about that some other time. If we can do something different with the streetscape standards for 29 North, we can keep what we've got out on 29 North. I would still like to have the other entrance corridors be essentially capped for now, with a commitment that we're going to try to revisit that and get the entrance corridor requirements figured out to make sure we've got the authority to do what we want to do.
And so that would be at a height of 5 stories.
Or 5 to 7, 5 to 8, I guess we were saying that. If they're currently CX8, it was being suggested that they
Oh, I
be
see.
five by right and up to 8 by SUP. And through the SUP process, we could insist on some setback requirements and some other things that aren't presently in the ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, but not roll that out to the rest of the city.
If folks don't particularly want to do that, I'm not going to
Okay.
insist on it.
All right.
I mean, I hear the arguments, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
Raises the-
planning commission has done a lot of, hard work, and I'd like to honor that with the rest of the city, but I think that what you're proposing for these, relatively few number of areas to minimize the risk in the short term, I think is reasonable.
Again, I just think it's totally in reverse, where primarily the areas that are strip malls are not particularly developed, we apply this, and then the areas that do have historic development or are an area like Rose Hill.
But we're doing this whole other thing that we came up with to address that.
Well, I mean, the extent of that currently is limited, but,
Well, we haven't mapped it at all as of yet.
so my understanding of what council's consensus was up to this point, maybe that understanding is wrong.
Well, say what you think it is.
A section of Preston and
Section of
Cherry,
Cherry.
and that's the extent of it.
What would happen there?
That's the modified corridor.
Yeah, right. That's what I thought we were agreeing that there was going to be a
So you see
reduction.
areas outside of that with particularly the commercial corridors where it's, I guess, is East High the one that concerns you most, Michael?
No, I mean, really just one side of East High as it would connect to the urban Rivanna River corridor plan, the side, a few parcels adjacent to the river, but not even necessarily the whole thing. And then areas into the Rose Hill neighborhood where I think you still have IX 8 depending on what our agreement on what the core overlay district would be, still areas of Preston that would be like CX 8. Again, I mean, to me, it just seems, at least from where I was coming from, the concern is reversed, where most of these areas do not, in the entrance corridors, do not face displacement pressure from capital investment, and then the areas that did.
Yeah. But you've got a different lens, I think, than what Lloyd is bringing to it, where he's focused more on, as you drive into the city, what are you going to see?
I mean, I actually joined Michael's concerns, but I didn't have a sense that was where the rest of council was heading, so.
Well, I think that, I think it would be really difficult at this point to kind of, identify every, seems like you and Lloyd and Michael are kind of coming at it from different perspectives. And I'm just trying to figure out how we can work to try to address both of y'all's concerns. And it's almost seemed like the finish line that keeps being moved every time we get there, which is that I know this is a big decision, but we need to kind of try to figure out what we want to do here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that we've addressed Lloyd's concern with respect to the entrance corridors, and I think we've at least taken a stab at Michael's with these, call them special corridors, what's the name of them?
The
Corridors of interest?
core neighborhood
Yeah,
corridor,
that.
core neighborhood
Persons of
corridor.
interest.
And maybe we
All
could
our
take
persons of
that, maybe we could take that model, Michael, of the core neighborhood, core,
The corridor overlay, right, we'll just call it that.
whatever,
Yeah.
the special
I mean, the
corridors.
corridor overlay could be, I remember council kind of agreeing with the notion of that being the length of, the entire length of Preston. Now, that overlaps with the entrance corridor, so one would have to decide now which leads, but leave that aside. To me, it's very easy to add that to Rose Hill and Harris Street. Those are all within the ambit of the intent.
I mean, that seems reasonable to me and largely addresses the concern I have. I just think for that to happen while simultaneously limiting the approach throughout, granted, a lot of JPA, there's only the key intersections or CX8, but up through Barracks, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's still that discretionary process to get to those higher heights and density, but I just think those are the areas where it's, we would want the greatest intensity, where there's not those countervailing displacement pressures. And so to have it all simultaneously, I just worry reduces the concept in the memo of the zoning buffer by too great a degree. And obviously I've been open to, I think there's areas where that trade-off I don't think really changes the supply that much, but can help, address some of the concern around displacement. But once we've applied it this extensively, I worry it really does start to impact the zoning buffer, particularly, I mean, in those key intersections of JPA. And I understand the concern along Barracks, but I mean, it's not, likewise with Fontaine, it's not exactly
Garden spot.
yeah, of a entrance into the city already. But I've said that, so.
So,
You still feel the same, Lloyd?
yeah.
Okay.
The question is, do we have any sense of consensus?
I think Juan and Lee and I are willing to go along with the up to 5. No. Yeah, up to 5, and then with a special use
Up to 8.
To 8.
And is there,
For the
in this
entrance
scenario, is there anything that is at NX10 with a 5 up to 10 by SUP, or is 8 the,
I say you could
Yeah.
go 5 up to 10.
Yeah, 5 up to 10?
Well, I guess the question is, since 10 right now under the draft would mean arguably 13 with bonuses. I'm, given the logic that you all have persuaded me of for 29 North, where frankly, my only real concern with 29 North has been the question of setbacks and green space in front and that kind of thing. If there's a way to increase that so that we're not bound by the, building to within 10 feet or 15 feet or, whatever it's going to be, then I'm perfectly willing to let the areas that are designated NX10 go to 10 stories, because those particular spots I don't have a problem with, except for these setbacks.
So that would simply be the entrance corridor, the 29 entrance corridor. You're saying you're okay with?
Basically, I think
well,
that's right.
give me,
And then Barracks Road.
Barracks Road is inclusive.
Barracks Road Shopping Center, I believe all of it is NX10, isn't that right?
Yeah. Mostly, it steps down, well, it's not.
Maybe
I don't know
Barracks Road,
exactly.
to the
can't-
north wing is NX8 or something. Oh, boy. No, it's I go to NX10.
I guess what is Barracks Road Shopping Center is all NX10.
It's
And
NX10.
those properties beyond it, as you're approaching 250, step down.
I mean, that entrance corridor
Cedars
goes
Court
all the
goes
way down to
down.
Ivy Road.
There you go. Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah.
So are we saying essentially Barracks Road North? You're fine, Lloyd, with leaving that as it is on the map? Subject to these
Well, I'm.
green space requirements?
Okay, we've still got the area, I mean, frankly, what I said about NX10, I was thinking more of the area north of the bypass, but also Barracks Road Shopping Center kind of fits too. The lighter purple there with the Cedar Court area, is that an NX 8? Is that what that is?
We're going to pull up the key.
The
Legend.
lighter purple,
Hydraulic and Hillsdale.
There you go.
It's NX5.
NX 5. Well, I can't tell between NX 5 and NX 8 at this point.
Well, I don't
Can
see
you
much
click on one of those
NX8.
parcels so we can see what the box pops up as?
Which specific parcel are we looking at?
Just pick one of the ones that's a lighter purple.
5.
Okay,
Right. Yes, you're correct.
okay,
There,
and NX 5 I can live with, that's fine, sure. Okay. So yeah, from here on up, along, assuming we can do something about the setbacks and streetscape kind of considerations as we've discussed, I'm fine with that. Okay. Do we have a consensus then?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
it's only taken us
basically,
2 hours to get there.
well, it's a pretty big accomplishment, though. I mean, so essentially, everything Barracks Road North, we're going to leave as it is, subject to these changes. All the other entrance corridors, we're going to take to 5 with an SUP that will take us higher. And the hope is that in 12 to 18 months, we'll have
16.
more and better
We
guidelines.
will have invested in these, we will have invested more thought into these
Yeah.
areas.
I feel good about that. I think it's a good compromise.
Okay.
Next. All of the streets that are listed in the memo, starting with Plymouth Road, page 2.
So this gets back to sort of the question of how are we really defining RA, RB, and RC? And until we've got that agreed upon, I don't know that we can meaningfully consider that. One of the decisions we had made a month or two ago was that we seem to have a consensus to remove commercial uses from RA, RB, and RC. Is that still the thinking?
Well, I don't know that we had consensus.
Yeah.
I think, Michael, you're not,
That's another one we looked at, for special use permit, is that?
Yes.
here's my view. I am perfectly fine with having commercial in the RA, RB, RC. Now, I'm not okay with having hotels or whatever, some of the stuff that was in there. I don't get that at all, but most other commercial I'm okay with. What I am concerned about, and maybe people say that this is weak-willed or something, I don't know, but I feel like the people in the residential neighborhoods, in their minds, and I think we need to respect this, feel like they're already taking a huge hit with RB and RC. And I think that including commercial at this point, beyond home occupations, which home occupations are
Already
allowed.
dealt with the other part of
Yeah.
the ordinance.
I think it's adding insult to injury. Now, that's how they will feel about it. Whether in some objective status that is true, I'm not going to adjudicate. But for that reason, and that's not an incredibly principled reason, I think it's just a matter of trying to get a sense of how people in the community feel. I think it would be prudent to delay commercial in residential spaces until further study or until things move a little further down the road.
And I'll say, I am not opposed to having some commercial in some parts of residential neighborhoods. I am concerned about specifically putting commercial in and allowing, even by SUP, allowing commercial in literally every single residential home in the city. Because if the whole idea of the commercial, or the neighborhood commercial is that people would be able to walk to and not have to drive to the store, the restaurant, the coffee shop, the whatever, then it requires that there be a certain density for it to work. And we don't have that density in most of the areas that we're designating RA, frankly, and in many of the places that are RB. And so the only way those as commercial establishments will work is if people are driving there. And that's not what we want to have happen at the moment.
It's
Now,
kind of a chicken or egg sort of thing, I
Yeah.
think.
well, of course it is, but if we look at it as, this is a goal, again, I've said, let's think of this as getting us to where we think we want to be in 2050. We don't have to get there, just as, sort of reflecting your thought, Brian, we don't have to get there in 2023.
Yeah.
Right, I think that my concern was that, that if you have a little corner shop and the current residential density can't support it, and maybe not can't support it for another 8 to 10 years, and that shop is there, either they're going to close up or they're going to try to expand their impact and try to attract, more shoppers, and those shoppers would have to drive there, and there won't be parking for all of that. So that's my concern. And I know at one point we had talked about whether it would be 4,000 or 2,000
We dropped it to 2, didn't we?
Is it? I could. Okay.
Yeah, but you have to, if you go to the use restrictions, it defines what the cap is within those districts.
2,500, is that?
I believe it's 2,500.
Okay.
There are conflicting numbers that appear in different places, but 2,500 is the operative limit.
Yeah.
It is, in this case, that yeah.
So I think that I too can support this as maybe something that we maybe pick up with the next revision to the comp plan or the zoning zoning ordinance.
You mean the small business option?
Yeah,
What
neighborhood
Brian-
commercial.
Yeah, you know what I mean, what Brian said.
Yeah.
Okay.
You okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Michael, how do you feel about it?
Well, we've had this conversation, so I won't rehash it, but I disagree. I think people will be upset about the amount of units allowed by right, not small-scale neighborhood commercial. And I don't know if we'll really get to it next comp plan, since special use permit was like the very, very first baby step, but maybe a crawl. But I know I'm in the minority there.
So I guess we have a general.
Yeah, and to be clear, I see this as like, I support the aims of commercial in residential districts at some point, but I think that there's enough other stuff changing at this point that we come back to this in a year or two and maybe have some more study about the most appropriate way to roll this out. I would be most comfortable with that. I think that's the most prudent course right now.
Yeah.
Might be.
Okay. All right, so one of the other constraints that I have been asking for, and I don't know whether other folks share this concern or to what extent, is the notion of there being some limit on the size of buildings in RA, RB, and RC, noting that right now, as I conclude, you can have up to a 9,000 square foot building in RA, 3 stories of 3,000 square feet each. In RB, it would be 3 stories of 4,500, to 4,500? 3,500, so 10,500 square foot gross floor area. And in RC, if my notes are correct, and maybe they are not, but I thought that the most recent draft of things would allow up to 4 stories of up to 4,000 square feet per story. It's at least 3 stories times 4,000 square, or 35, where is it? Yeah, 4,000. So it would be a 12,000 square foot building, or maybe even a 16,000 square foot building. And I've said before that I think particularly for RA, we ought to be looking at some limit like 4,500. We got an email that's suggesting 5,000. I could live with that. Either one is still significantly larger than the average house in Charlottesville, but it's not going to look so much larger that it would be inconsistent with what we were talking about 2 years ago as RA being house-sized.
Can I introduce at this point the
Yeah.
email from Commissioner Stolzenberg that he sent on the 13th of November? Do you remember this email?
I'm sure.
Yeah, so he basically was trying to get us to think in terms of building footprints as opposed to floor area.
Right.
And one of the reasons is that floor area becomes kind of dodgy. Do you include, service areas? Do you include, if you're looking at like Zillow or something, what they would consider to be part of the usable or net floor area versus what, the gross of, if you included all the garages or whatever. So his point, and help us here, I think that I agree with him, it makes more sense to talk about building footprint.
So I agree as well, and I'd say further, it does become a significant challenge both for property owners and for staff in adjudicating a square footage cap. If I could provide, I worked in a prior community that had this. You had run into particular issues in defining what is the usable space in the attic and how that gets measured, and in the basement, based on heights. And then you also end up with a lot of gaming of that. So in my prior community, we talked about it as the tool used was FAR, and we talked about it as the FAR special house. The FAR special house, because of the way the square footage was measured of the house, you ended up with nearly flat roofs in order to maximize the space that was practically usable, but under the measurement cap. So they were all 6'8" ceilings to the maximum extent possible, and they were all built on mounds in order to maximize the amount of space that was below grade, but again usable in order to again game that system. But the other thing, very practical thing that comes up is every time somebody wants to put even a small addition on, they have to measure the entire house according to those, what ends up being a very complex set of rules of how you measure that space. What is measurable space? What is counted space and what is not counted space? And so they have to pay somebody to then effectively produce a measurement of the whole house that we can then verify so that we know that this addition hasn't exceeded their cap. And so it ends up also being a costly prospect for that property owner, because you necessarily have to introduce a set of rules that define what they need to count, and then they need to hire somebody to do that measurement for them.
So that makes total sense.
Do we count steps, footprint, or do we count square feet? I mean, what are you saying?
So I agree with the recommendation of measuring footprint.
Okay.
So do you agree that we should allow a 9,000 square foot house or 9,000 square foot building in an RA zone?
So what I would say is that space that's created allows for the flexibility to design different types of buildings that meet the particular needs of a lot.
So the answer is yes, you do think we should allow 9,000 square foot buildings in RA?
I think we should allow the building envelope to accommodate flexibility. One of the challenge you run into in defining this space, so if you put an absolute cap on the square footage, you run into this issue with how you administer that and the costs that are imposed on property owners who are doing additions and so on. With the footprint, the more you constrain that footprint, the more you're now cutting off options as to how a building is configured, how someone chooses to how someone might be able to lay out the building.
But
So
if we don't constrain the footprint, or we have the constraint of 3,000 square feet,
Right.
and if they want to build something that's 3,000 square feet, one story, that's fine. or if we're saying 4,500 square feet, they could have 2 towers on either end, or any number of, they could do all kinds of things. The question is that going to be house-sized at 9,000 square feet?
So what I'm going to ask Christie or Lee to speak to this issue as our team that put together these rules in the first place.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks. One thing I would add is, this particular requirement does not work in isolation, that it works in conjunction to make a house size box. When you think about particularly building width, that is very important. When we're thinking about house size, that building width is the perception and sort of the rhythm of as you go down the street. So that in conjunction with the height, in conjunction with building coverage and footprint, those really work in concert in order to get a house size box. Another piece of this, when we were thinking about setting that threshold, for sale product types tend to have bigger footprints because each unit wants to have a ground floor entrance to make that a fee simple development type. And so we wanted to create a footprint size and threshold that had that flexibility built in so that it would encourage more affordable for sale unit types, or still allow for that. So it's getting to that point that James was getting at of trying to hit that point of flexibility, but really none of these work in isolation. Those pieces and requirements all work together, particularly the building width, building height, footprint, and building coverage.
So I don't see building width as one of the criteria in RA. Am I missing something?
Look at 2-12. Well, that's our,
It's on the second, so if you go to RA and you go to the second page of RA,
so the lot.
so your first page is dealing with lot specifications, your
Right.
second page is dealing with building specifications. And then building width, I believe, is under,
Okay, I'd say it's 60
Under massive.
60 feet in one dimension, 70 feet in another dimension, which is 4,200 square feet. How is that a limitation on, of 3,000 square feet?
What are you seeing, 40 and 70?
Okay, I'm looking at the massing requirements on page 2-7.
Okay.
Primary street width, as I understand it, it got changed a bit, but it now says primary street width maximum is 60 feet. Side street is 70 feet. If the building is built 60 feet by 70 feet, that's 4,200 square feet. That is more than 3,000 square feet, not less. It's not a limitation, is it?
So the double limitation really exists whenever you have a corner lot. So you wouldn't be able to exceed that in either direction. So that happens on corner lots. That 60-foot wide width is particularly important on interior lots. And so that 60 feet width in concert with the building footprint gets you a maximum building envelope, essentially.
But 60 feet times 50 feet is 3,000 square feet.
What she's saying is that the most you would get is like 60 by 60.
Right, that's 3,600 square feet, and that's not a limitation that is less than 3,000. I'm just not seeing anything in RA that constrains it to keep you under 9,000 square feet as a gross floor area.
I know, but what I'm hearing also is that size allows flexibility to provide, because one of the things that we want to address, there's an impact in housing costs, is that there's not enough stock, and this will increase not only quantity, but the type of housing, and it gives a flexibility, maybe the bottom unit may be affordable.
But we're only, if we're building an RA lot to the max, it's going to have 6 units, two of which, perhaps 3 of which, would be affordable. And that's 1,500 square feet per unit, 9,000 square feet for the building. And I'm getting back to what we were told 2 years ago, was that the idea of general residential was that we were going to have house-sized buildings. And 9,000 square feet is simply not a house-sized building. Now, maybe the answer is, we've changed our minds. What we were sold on 2 years ago, we shouldn't have been talking about. We're abandoning what we told everybody 2 years ago. If so, then somebody should have the guts to say that. I'm not going to say it. I will say that if that's what you're proposing, you're doing a bait and switch. Because
Well-
that's clearly not a house-sized building.
This part of we weren't here then, so.
Right. But I'm talking about going back to the consultants from whom we are now hearing. We were told we were going to have house-sized buildings in what we're now calling RA. And we're at least permitting buildings that are clearly not house-sized. And I just think we ought to be willing to say, oops, sorry, we've changed our minds. We didn't really mean it when we said we're going to have house-sized buildings. I am not prepared to say that.
Well, 3 of us weren't here 2 years ago, so I guess we can't say it either, huh?
If you assume that house-sized buildings was ever intended to be a constraint or a definition, or if you want to put it another way, a promise to the electorate, that we were going to have house-sized buildings in this in these kinds of neighborhoods, then we're clearly changing that.
Right. So Lloyd, I mean, I guess we are where we are now. 3 of us, that we weren't here when those decisions and that discussion took place, and so this is what we have now. And so I think that we can have, 9,000 square foot buildings, and if they're done right, that they could fit into a residential area to allow different, housing opportunities and options. And so, I mean, what is a regular sized home, or, what would you be comfortable with?
Well, what I have suggested on a number of occasions is 4,500 square feet, that first of all, that is still a large, very large, it would be one of the larger houses in Charlottesville, but it's somewhat house-sized, number one. Number two, if you want to have it, look at it in terms of affordable dwelling units or number of dwelling units at 6, that works out to 750 square feet per, which is actually pretty consistent with even 2-bedroom apartments that are available on the market right now. I sent everybody a copy of an article that I ran across that talked about the fact that apartments are getting smaller, that we don't have to have 1,500 square foot apartments for 3 bedrooms, for example. That the marketplace in Charlottesville, from what I could see going through mycar.com and so on, the marketplace for a 3-bedroom apartment is about 1,200 square feet. The marketplace for a 2-bedroom apartment is about 800 square feet. So we still have, if you want to expand it a little bit, say go to 5,000 square feet, now you can get 800 square foot apartments in there. I think that helps us meet the goals that we're trying to meet. It doesn't mean that everybody gets the biggest apartment available, but they tend to be more affordable if you build them smaller. And particularly, and this gets back to another point that I was raising again in an email last night, if we're talking about affordable dwelling units in these zones like RA, RB, and RC, and where it's clearly going to require, if it's going to be built as affordable, it's going to require significant subsidy from the city. We've got to decide whether that's a route we're willing to go down. And if we're going to say, we're going to tell people, yes, you can build a 9,000 square foot building there, and three of those units are going to be affordable, and my rough math from a few months ago was that would mean that it was going to need a city subsidy of roughly $100,000 per unit, more than double what we've been subsidizing other rental units for. That just strikes me as being a very poorly thought out plan.
Yeah, but we're not,
Yeah.
I mean, if Habitat or PHA wants to do this and say they get, I don't know, some wealthy donor outside of the city wants to make a contribution to build some extra houses there, I mean, that's no skin off our teeth. We're just giving them the permission to do it.
How often has that happened so far?
I don't know, but what difference does it make? I mean, in other words, if they can't get the subsidy from us or from, you know, I don't know, who's
A state agency or something.
someone, if they
Yeah.
can't get the money from someone, then they won't build it. If they can, they will. I mean,
Right.
I don't, that's the one thing about, I didn't agree with that point that you made in the email, because again, we're giving them the possibility of having this extra density bonuses
Yeah.
if they're able to find some other funding mechanism. We're not tying our
Yeah.
hands to do it.
Well, as long as everybody is okay with the idea that we're not going to be subsidizing those units, that's fine. But my
Yeah.
concern, particularly after the discussion that I was hearing some last night, was that and we're already seeing this in other situations, where we approve an SUP so that people can do this nice affordable housing project, and we know at the time we do so that we're effectively committing ourselves to a $3 million contribution down the road, even though we don't discuss that at the time we pass the SUP.
Yeah, I see this as different. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is just giving people the option to,
Yeah, and that's why this is giving them the option. That's why I'm comfortable with leaving it at this is one way, one vote with 9,000, square feet, so.
And likewise, I share that perspective. I think, can someone argue that it is not the size of like every single family home? Sure, but I mean, I truly believe it is a residential scale of a residential neighborhood. And in addition to rentals, I mean, we need a product on the market for ownership as well at that scale that's not currently available in terms of like condoized units. So that's where I'm at.
Of course, if we're looking at ownership at that point, I don't know exactly what affordable dwelling units constitute for affordability at that point, whether they could even build more than 3 or perhaps at most 4 units.
which is why they won't build them.
So we're creating something that we don't expect to be built?
We are giving people an envelope, and we are saying, you can build as much on the envelope as you can figure out how to get built.
That does not exceed.
Yeah,
X.
that's the envelope, that's the edge of the envelope.
And the reason we're doing that is because we think you're going to do good things, but we reasonably don't expect you to do good things.
But just
What
because the,
harm,
but just
what
because,
harm is it to give the possibility that some?
but just because the option is there doesn't mean they're gonna take it.
Because
yeah,
we
and what-
get people who do things like the house or the whatever you call that building on Booker Street.
I know that's kind of the lowest common denominator.
That's
isn't
what we
it?
have to deal with.
Yeah,
We will
but-
see the
So-
lowest common denominator, and if we don't plan for it, we're fools.
So I think we have 2 for 9,000. So, I mean, can we hear from the others so we can, decide on
This is for RA.
That's what I've talked about. I mean, the same principle applies to RB and RC, but not the same limits.
I mean, I'm basically on board with medium intensity residential in terms of the area in the city and what's being proposed in terms of the parameters.
RA was never suggested for medium-intensity residential.
Okay.
It was always suggested for general residential.
Excuse me. I'm in favor of RA plus medium intensity residential
With no limit.
with the limits that are here.
The 9,000 square feet, 10,500 square feet, or 16,000 square feet.
Yeah. Because I don't think that they're going to be built. I mean, again, I think and this is really hard to articulate, but architects and engineers, and again, no one's going to, well, I don't know how to give an argument that would overturn what you're saying. I mean, if you're saying, is it possible to build up to that maximum? Yes, it's possible. But the point that they're trying to make is they want to give as big a box, possibility space sort of box as possible, knowing that there's so many other things that come up that make it hard to build, such that, and then you add in the financial piece of it, you're not going to build these things that are that huge. Is it possible?
Except that people often, if people are, actually developers are the sane ones here. It's the people who come in with the ego projects that are not constrained by the economics.
I know, but we can't hold back development for the whole city because of some
One or two persons want
maniacs.
to do something, yeah.
I mean, I see what you're saying, and I do have some concerns if you multiply all this stuff out, but I get the concept that we need to use building footprint is the most reasonable way to think about this. And like James was saying earlier, if you did it in terms of square footage, you would end up with these ridiculous looking buildings and very complicated. Yeah. I think the massing, I think that the parameters that are laid out here aren't going to guarantee that, some large buildings are built, but, well, I'm going to back up from that. I've said enough.
I will note, we don't have, other than setback, which is pretty generous, we don't have any massing controls today in the single-family districts. So if we can use experience to date, nobody's maxing out to date in Charlottesville what they can do on their property.
Okay?
So the chances of that are slim.
Well, I mean, it could happen.
It could happen, but it may not. I mean, it gives you an option. And whether you exercise the option or not is completely different.
Well, let me ask the consultants one more time. So I know that they were trying to help us out here. And I know that you're using like your professional expertise, and you've seen this in other places. I mean, the mayor's point is pretty clear. If you just look at the math of what you could build, you could end up with some really large monstrosities. The notion is that the market and sane developers aren't going to let that happen. But can you talk us through a little more about when you're crafting these things, the massing, the percent coverage of the lot? What are the things that you think through that sort of put a constraint on maybe not house size, but house form or something like that, scale? Is there a way you could help us think through that a little more?
Yeah, I think, first off, the point that you're making of all these things working in concert, that's really important. In particular, building width is not something that you have today. And we have found in most of the communities we've worked in that is the most critical metric in ensuring things are house scale. Because even though some houses or buildings next to those houses may be a bit deeper, it's not generally perceived. It's the view as you're walking down the street. So that building width is an additional requirement over what you have today that's really important. Something else that we think about, and this really goes back early on in the diagnostic when we were looking at a lot of those different modeling scenarios on some existing lot types or sort of representative lots. And, we really think about using our backgrounds from other communities and working with architects and particularly small scale infill development and understanding what those general building types are and sort of general smallest scale footprints of what those units can look like when you're talking about small infill residential development and what the the limitations tend to be. So building width is something that people can feel like they generally can work with and make things compatible with some of the existing development patterns. Lot coverage, you'll notice that, or building coverage, excuse me, we've calibrated that up based on the different units, and that's because that tends to be a limitation in infill development. And, so building coverage is similar to footprint. And, that's the comment I made earlier. A lot of infill developers and the feedback we've gotten over time is they need that a bit deeper of a building in order to get those units that are more calibrated to for sale product types. It sort of tends to be, a small house in the front, and then you may have a couple of units that are sort of in the back. And so the building looks like a house from the front, but tends to be slightly deeper. And so that's really, it's particularly that width working in concert with the depth and the footprint and the coverage that we really think about. It's also why, we've gone from more 3-story to some of these being 2.5, and really making sure that the height is a bit more compatible than, what your regulations even allow for today in some instances. So I don't know if that added some clarity. Hopefully it just added a bit of context for how we think about it. It has been calibrated over time, as we've worked in communities and even in our previous experience with infill development.
Yes, that's helpful, thank you.
And Christy, could you note, was not our proposal initially for the RA district in particular for building width of 40 feet, and then it was increased to 60 feet?
That's correct. Yeah, so that was some of the feedback that I believe we got from Planning Commission was it was increased. So that it's just something to think about. I will emphasize over and over again, building width is really critical to this house scale concept.
What zone was that, or district type?
I'm sorry, that was
RA.
in the RA district.
And what happened again? You went from what to what?
It had been 40 feet in the first draft.
Yep, and went to 60 feet during the Planning Commission review.
It also bumped up to 3 full stories. It was at 2.5 stories, if I recall correctly, in the initial draft.
That's true as well, yeah.
So it had a true form and a smaller width
I'm
as
looking
originally
at the-
proposed.
I'm looking at the August version, so. And then the other piece of this, do you indicate the streetscape? Where is that indicated? So you have the, like, residential 2.2.2 that dictates the building sort of envelope, but the streetscape component is in a different location, correct?
That is, you would have to flip back to, I believe it was 4-17. So that streetscape component is determined by the street type that particular parcel is on.
Okay,
And so, most of these are going to be on local streets. So
Okay.
that local street on 4-17 will tell you what that street sidewalk and landscape requirement would be.
okay. And can you just maybe tell us off the top of your head what those might look like? Help us think through, so in an RA type lot, what is, just like we talked about earlier, James, with the, we were talking about up at Barracks Road and north.
I remember it's a total of 11. I believe what it was 5 feet of green zone and 6 of walking,
Okay.
pedestrian sidewalk.
That's correct.
In a residential
On
space?
the local streets, yeah.
On the local streets.
Yeah.
So on a street like Rugby Avenue, would it be bigger than that?
I don't know what street type Rugby Avenue is.
Okay, but basically you're saying from the
but
curb,
here we have it.
Rugby Avenue would be, well, I'm sure it would be 11 feet.
It's
I mean, neighborhood A, neighborhood B, local
Yeah,
are
it's-
all 11 feet.
11 feet, yep.
so that's from the curb to the property line.
Right.
And then from
No, it's not
that,
from the curb to the property line. It's basically from the curb and then what you need to get to 11 feet total.
okay,
But there's also a setback of,
And then the setback starts from the edge of your streetscape zone, wherever that.
so it's
falls.
effectively going to be
11 plus 10.
21 feet, 11 feet plus 10 feet.
From curb, from edge of pavement.
Which is why some of the pictures we got, like the one big building plopped down on Rugby, I mean, it may be that tall, I don't know, but it's not going to be that close to the road. It's going to be further in. It's going to be 20 feet from the curb. I don't know if you remember that picture that we got, the photoshopped.
We got a bunch of them.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I'm sorry, something, oh, well, and just remember, in these districts, the option exists, and I understand that it's presented as an option, but the option exists to be either at that 20 feet or in line with the existing setbacks.
Right, right.
So do folks have other issues associated with the definition of RA and then RB and RC, and then we can look to specific applications?
I'm basically on board with what's in the draft zoning ordinance with the various changes that have been made with the planning commission. I think that this is, I understand why it's upsetting to people, but I think it's going to make a big difference in terms of, workforce housing.
I don't have a concern with the definitions.
I'm good.
Wade? You
I'm
okay
fine.
with that?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. So it sounds like we have a majority vote on what the definitions are going to look like. Now I guess we're ready to talk to specific applications. The first one on the memo is Plymouth Road.
Yeah, I'll just advocate for the folks there. I toured their street. It's the little sort of,
Yeah,
L
it's not a
shape.
cul-de-sac, but.
it's almost like one.
Yeah.
It seems to me that this is almost an artifact of the mapping exercise. I think I can see, if I squint real close, how following the streets at work typology you ended up with this, but that little nook back there is more similar to the spaces over to the left on the screen. That is beige.
Yeah.
So I agree with those folks and would vote to have that RA.
Which specific lots?
So I outlined it in the memo.
It's basically here, back around here.
As mentioned in the memo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be RA for lots fronting on Plymouth, Harrow, Sherwood, and Oxford. And is Sherwood to the upside on this of Oxford, or
Correct.
Sherwood all the way down here?
No, I think just to Oxford.
Okay,
Just to like,
yeah,
this one is like right there.
right, okay. And then the recommendation would be to maintain RB on Rose Hill Drive.
Yeah.
Well, that,
I think,
Yeah, these lots here as well.
well, the RB would be referring to these, I assume,
Yes.
because that's an RC,
got it, sorry.
okay?
Different color taupe.
Right. Folks agree with that?
Yes,
Yes, I agree with what's in the memo, yeah.
I agree with what's in the memo.
In the minority, but it feels arbitrary.
Yes, as do other things.
Well, while we're in the neighborhood, do you want to talk about Rugby Avenue?
No, let's just go down the list.
Okay. Davis Avenue, and it's parallel street Watson Avenue.
Yeah, this is a little awkward because Juan and I live close to there.
Yeah.
I think the arguments that were made in their letter and that are in the memo are reasonable ones, but the biggest thing that I would say is that, and again, maybe this is an ad hoc response, but we're putting Macca there, we're putting Park Street Church, and we're putting Mount View on the other side of Locust Grove.
Yeah.
Plus, we've got Park Avenue dumping in right there. I think we've already asked that part of the community to take on a lot of extra. And so I'm inclined to support the request.
Of course, Davis doesn't connect to the Mountain View.
Right.
It's in
but
the same-
it's
It's in the same
in
general
terms of the-
vicinity.
It's within a half a mile.
Well, no, what happens is people take, they take Calhoun, they take North Street
Yep,
to get over to Calhoun.
Correct.
They come south on Park. They go east on North, and then they jig jog to,
Right.
which is a technical term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
to-
but we
to
got, we
Calhoun.
understand.
Which still
They
doesn't.
zigzag.
Which still doesn't implicate Davis.
Well, I mean, what,
Well, but you could, but depending on where you hang a left or a right, you could hang a right on Davis or,
There's no earthly reason you would hang a left on Davis to be able to then make a right on Marshall and another left on Watson to be able to join up with St. Charles.
their point is that this little corner, this
right,
between Park and John Water Parkway and Locust and Long Street and where all that dumps out over by the river, people are using all of that as a cut through.
yes, they
And
do.
Their point simply is you're adding more traffic through our space by putting in the Mountain View, and then you've got these two new developments. Please give us some relief. So I don't know if that's,
Yeah, many of these same people contacted me and probably all of you all with some of the same other developments that we approved probably over a year ago. And, you know, I still supported those developments, knowing that of the traffic impact. And we are still seeing, you know, impacts of when they closed down the bridges for a while when they was doing those improvements. People realized, oh, this is a
cut
good,
through,
you
it's
know,
a
shortcut.
way to go around and,
And people do, you know,
people
use
do.
that to
And-
use Bellevue to
Yeah.
River Road and things to skirt 250.
Yes.
So anyway, I support the
the
RA,
recommendation.
yeah.
To change it to RA. Well, I look on Davis Avenue as it is, although I've got friends who live on Davis Avenue is wider. It's got sidewalks. It's more, as a street, it is better able to handle more traffic than some other places where we're putting RB.
it's this that they're worried about, Lloyd. It's
Right
this
in
part
there.
It's coming out of here and coming out of here. And the
Right.
fact that people are coming all the way over here to get here as opposed to taking 250.
Right, they go off the ramp
So
and go that
This is what they're
way.
upset about. It's not Davis itself, it's the connection to Park.
Yeah, they go off.
Well, the
they
emails
go
that
off.
I got were specifically about Davis.
But,
And I don't understand why the argument that you're making would apply to say that Davis ought to be RA, or it said which would be applied to lots fronting Watson, Davis, and Marshall. So I guess it would be everything within that block and maybe
Yes.
south of Watson and north of Davis as well. And
using Davis as a cut-through to hang a right on Park Street to avoid, all of those little streets over there, they don't want to be on 250, so they get off at 250
Yeah.
to go over there to Park Street or wherever else they want to go.
Yeah.
Because, you know, this movement here is tight because of the traffic signal here. So people know if you go there, you get a little bit more.
You get a little bit
you know,
better.
leeway to.
I mean, I drive to and from my house on that street at least once or twice, and sometimes 4 times a day, so I'm
Which
not.
one, Davis?
On Park.
Oh, okay.
And I can honestly say that despite the traffic that backs up along Park Street, I've never perceived Davis to be a shortcut. It forces you to take 3 times as many turns.
So, but.
Two of them
you-
two
you
of which
wouldn't
are
use
left.
it. You wouldn't
You
use it,
wouldn't be a
you
person
know,
to
but
use it.
You're, I know that, you know, when 250 is backed up, you know, that people maybe not necessarily use Davis, but they find the quickest, you know.
They find the quickest route.
And they take this,
Yep.
Calhoun, to St. Charles to Calhoun
Yep.
to Bellevue, to River Road to 250, you miss a lot of traffic.
Yep, you do.
Well, you take Park Street home
Sometimes,
to Greenbrier.
sometimes.
Yeah,
Frankly, Park Street, John Warner Parkway between 5:30 and 6, Park Street's faster.
Of course it is.
yeah, I mean, what they're saying is absolutely true. People are using all those back streets to get
Yep.
around that junction.
Yep.
Really,
They
all
do.
three of those, the Locust, Park, and John Warner.
Yes, we do.
Michael, how do you feel about this?
Have done it.
Same way, I think there are going to be other streets throughout the city that could make just as strong cases, and my concern is making a change based on whoever happened to reach us. I say that without begrudging anybody involved, but it seems arbitrary.
I agree with you. But I sense we're outvoted 3-2. Okay, let's talk about JPA.
I am generally supportive of what is being requested because we're putting so much development in that zone. I think that is a small kindness we could do for those folks.
So you're in support of what's happening at the top of page 3, am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And so there are two parts to that. One would be to reduce some of the properties from RX3 to RC. And then the other piece would also, let's see, staff recommends retaining RX3 zoning along Stadium Road and Shamrock. Council could also decide that Shamrock, where it intersects JPA, is not a key intersection and therefore replace CX8 with CX5.
Okay.
Brian, are you suggesting both?
I'm good with both. Yeah. I feel like that area has taken the brunt of a lot of,
There's a
obviously.
lot of stuff going on over
And
there.
if that gives them some peace of mind, then I would be, I don't know where Juan went to, but.
I think he
Michael, how do
stepped
you feel
out.
about the JPA changes?
Guess. Arbitrary. So,
Well, I will tell you, my thought on it has been that we are already proposing anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 units, or not units of housing, but student housed, housing that many more students in that area. And based on some statistics that I found, I passed on to you all a week or so ago, it looks like a number of students that are housed in other neighborhoods other than the JPA neighborhood, who are, for example, housed in 10th and Page and other places like that, really is smaller than what we had originally been thinking. It was certainly smaller than what I had been thinking. And so I mentioned that only to say that I don't think that we would see as many benefits to putting more students or residential units in this sliver between JPA and Stadium. And therefore, I am inclined to not push for more density in that area, because I'm not sure we would see a corresponding benefit elsewhere. So although I had probably 3 months ago been talking much more actively about, hey, let's cram as many students in there as we can, I don't feel that strongly about it now. I do think even if we were to keep those as RX3, I probably agree with them that the Shamrock JPA intersection should be reduced to a CX5.
I think I think the proposal that Mr. Freeze and his team came up with to preserve the feel of individual homes and buildings, et cetera, so going from RX3 to RC is fine, and I'm also fine with reducing to CX5.
There is one sentence here, however, staff recommends maintaining the RX3 zoning along Stadium Road and Shamrock. What's driving that?
Just that those are, so Stadium Road is directly across from the university.
They're right there.
Stadium, right up there, right? It's directly across from the university. Right there.
Yeah, it's right there.
And then Shamrock is
down there.
the through street.
Yep.
So those are the basis of those
It
recommendations.
sounds like you're okay with RC and some of that, but you want to preserve RX.
He's saying that RX3 along Stadium and Shamrock should remain.
Right.
Well,
That's-
not he, but your group.
Along Olive Stadium and along Olive Shamrock?
Yes.
Or
Well, in those.
so not just the intersection of Stadium and Shamrock?
Right. My point would be from where it's CX5 to Stadium
Uh-huh.
on Shamrock, retaining that at RX3.
I don't see Shamrock on there.
It's,
How
yeah,
come
for
I'm
some
missing
reason, it's
it?
the
Wait, I
unlabeled
need to
street.
look over here. Let me try my little thing.
Harmon is there in big letters.
I
Look
see
one to the-
Harmon.
Look one to the right.
Oh, there it is. Okay. I can see it on my computer better than I can see it there. Okay. Thank you. I see it now.
Why is it important to keep that RX3?
It's just simply the fact that Shamrock is the through street and Stadium is directly abutting the university. So you're making RC the interior kind of neighborhood streets, and the outside streets are going to RX, or remaining at RX.
So Harmon, Washington, Observatory, Montebello, Chelsea, those would be RC, but Stadium and Shamrock would be RX.
Yeah.
I'm good with that. Good with that, Vice Mayor?
You think the neighbors will be okay
I
with
was in
that?
back listening with Keena, so I heard most of it.
So are you okay with the staff recommendation or suggestions of?
Yeah.
So you think they'll be, so the people will be okay? The neighbors, the neighborhood? Okay,
Okay, sounds like we have a majority on that.
it'll be okay.
Rugby Avenue,
Okay, here we go. All right, I see it. And we want to,
so there's basically a cross of Rugby Avenue, Rose Hill Drive that is RC. The neighbors would like it to be RB or RA.
okay, wait.
So at Rugby and Rose Hill.
Okay, there's a key connecting, okay. I
And don't they
see.
also want up here close to Rugby Road it to be not as extensive? Am I reading that? Was there also a request to have this come back here, maybe?
I know we got at least one request to do that.
And this is RC, right?
Yes.
This is RB,
Right. And the beige is RA.
and so their request is to make this all RB.
Yes. Now,
Wait a minute, what about the, wait a, hold on. What, the 600 feet, where is that? You see, they're
600
saying,
feet from the intersections.
oh, okay.
So according to the
Come down
streets
here.
that work typology, this would be an RC, and then I guess it's 600 feet in each.
In either direction,
from the intersection.
it says the methodology calls for the RC designation to extend 600 feet or to the next cross street. Okay. The council would like to change the zoning designation. Staff recommends reducing the length of the street, but not eliminating the designation. So what would that do, Brian, can you show me?
So it would mean, for example, instead of this, we could maybe scrunch it down to here,
Oh,
and
you
scrunch
make it
this into
small.
here,
Okay,
something like that.
because that's where they have the little, what's his name now? You know, because of the bus issue we're having. You know, the four-way stop. That's where the
neck
four-way
down-
stop
neck downs
is.
at The neck downs at that intersection.
Yes. But you're saying on either side go this way. The intersection would still be there, but the little, this color would shrink on either side. But the four-way stop would still be there.
It would still, well, or traffic light or whatever,
Whatever, well,
but
right now it's a four-way stop.
the staff recommendation would still be to keep at least the spots right around the intersection as RC.
Right, right
Now,
there.
One thing that I think we have to,
And there are 4 houses on that, on those corners, right?
each corner.
Yep.
One thing I think we have to keep in mind is that if the overall scheme here is that we want to find ways and places to increase density, this is one of those places. And we are, we so far, I mean, if you look at other places where there are suggestions to increase density, I frankly think that that is a more likely place to increase density than at the other end of Rugby Avenue, where with the hill and everything, you're just not going to have much luck cramming a lot of people in there. And so if we're looking for places to put more people and to have a little, I know we discarded the notion of a node a couple of years ago, but that's effectively what that would become. If we're looking for places to do that, that's certainly one place.
And I would agree with that. And I don't mean to be too glib. I think for this and all the previous ones we've discussed, that there are legitimate policy reasons for what we've discussed and the decisions made. I just feel like the change won't really address the core concern of some of the neighbors. So I agree with, yes, and the other ones as well. So I would concur with the mayor's point here, and I mean, the change, no matter what, could be very marginal. I don't see it addressing the core concern of the neighbors, and in this case, I concur that this is an area where that makes, particular sense.
And I will come back to the point I made earlier, that I think we need to think about, to the extent that we can, and we can't always, but sometimes we can, if there's a place where we can say 20 years from now, we would expect to see more density someplace. We would expect to see enough of a concentration so that we could have some neighborhood commercial that might work. We have a wide enough street in Rugby Avenue to make that possible. We have a number of other assets. We have schools nearby and so on. Again, although I've got a lot of friends over there, I've got to say that this notion of encouraging 20 years from now a higher concentration, that's a spot that makes sense.
I'm fine with keeping it.
Okay, I guess we got a majority on that. Orange Street. We got the same email basically today on that.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So the meadows didn't show up on this. You raised that last time as there being some specific areas in the meadows that you thought were at risk of displacement. Did that get dropped somewhere?
I didn't have that on the list that I received. Sorry.
It was discussed in the meeting that was down in the basement, I think, and I was calling in with COVID. Anyway.
But it wasn't one of the streets that was submitted to James. Remember, he asked
Yeah,
everybody
yeah.
by the.
Well, it doesn't mean we can't talk about it.
Oh, no, I didn't say that, but that's why it wasn't. These are things that we all submitted to him by the deadline, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about it.
Let's talk about it before the end of the evening. Let's talk about Orange Street.
Yeah, I can't quite see what the,
What is, okay.
What is it that's motivating the
There
person?
isn't really anything in the email to indicate. I make a presumption that where you look at the outline of the CX-5, it basically, in order to ensure that there's some level of buildability, if you will, within that area of CX-5, they included some parcels on Orange Street. And I think, I can only presume that the concern was about the loss of those parcels.
But we did
Those three-
something similar on Gillespie
Yeah,
and on
there's a lot of different
Grove.
places. Yeah, and I want to be clear, I wasn't recommending, I was only recommending that if council believes that there's an issue here that needs to be addressed, my recommendation essentially is don't change the proposal for the property that's actually at the corner of Orange and East High. But
Yeah, right here.
fundamentally, I'm not recommending, I wouldn't say that I'm
These are
recommending
the
a
three.
change.
If we want to, we could, but we don't have to.
Yeah, I'm just not really sure what was, I mean, I don't, for the other ones, I feel like I can at least muster an argument. I'm not really sure what the argument would be here besides that the person just doesn't like it.
And part of the argument that is made is that these houses are owned by and being rented at, they would say, below market values. And while we applaud that, it doesn't mean that we ignore other realities for when that person decides to sell or move on or whatever.
And it doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to be bought up.
Yeah. And all three of those houses back up against the Charlottesville Gastroenterology property, which is already proposed for CX-5 and would remain that way. So I'm inclined to leave it as is.
Me too.
Okay,
Michael?
you okay with leaving it as CX-5?
Similar with the others, it's hard.
Yeah.
Seems like a marginal change. I mean,
Right,
So we can believe it.
yeah.
Okay, so now we're on Preston.
Preston Avenue, between 10th Street and Rugby Road, we've gotten a lot of comment on that.
So is this connected with the whole letter that, the latest letter that Preservation Piedmont sent out?
I believe so.
It's
yes.
related to it. We've gotten a couple letters that are kind of interrelated.
Gene Hyatt.
Gene Hyatt has written, as well as Preservation Piedmont has written. Of course, Gene is associated with
But
Preservation
the latest
Piedmont,
one
which
that
is written separately.
Jenny Keller sent was from Preservation.
She and Jean sent the same one.
Yeah, it's from Preservation Piedmont. It was
Yes, sir.
very detailed. It had a table and everything else.
The one with the table, I believe, came this week.
Yeah, I think I forwarded that.
yeah, it was Monday, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was very thoughtful, particularly how it was protecting African-American history. Yeah, I was inclined to just adopt it outright, but I don't know the implications of,
Well, does this address that?
yeah, this is part of that.
It addresses the parcels on Rosser.
Okay, let's zoom in. Okay,
And so that, in that case, it was suggesting that the RX3 designation only be limited to those that are fronting Preston Avenue and removing the 3 parcels that front on Rosser from that designation.
so they would all then go from RX3 to RA,
Yeah, consistent with the remainder of the street.
where she's circling with the little
Yeah.
arrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you were copied on this. Let me forward this to you, Leah.
The one that she sent to the wrong email and then she sent it to the city email, is that the one you're talking about?
Could be.
Yes,
Sounds like.
Okay,
yeah.
so you got it.
yes, I got it twice.
I wish we could actually bring this email up because it was very,
Yes, very detailed. But what we're saying is then, because you saw the email, right, James, that Brian is talking about?
Yeah.
And you're saying that what's on page 3, under Preston Avenue, addresses the concerns of the email we got, or no?
On one line.
one line. It's a very detailed email.
Right.
Yeah, it is. But this, on this little sheet, addresses one part of the email. And what will that mean if we address one part and not the others? We just address them on another day. Another day,
It's up to us.
within that 12 to 18 months.
Michael, have you looked at the email
I have, yes.
and the table in it? Did you see this one?
I just haven't had time.
Tinsley Town,
Yep,
We can,
What's the date on that one,
it
Brian?
was the 27th, Monday.
Monday.
What time?
5:19 PM.
Yeah, I got it at 5:22, yeah.
so probably want to take this piece by piece.
That's right, I printed that one out.
Hold on. Here we go. This is what I need.
Yeah, it seemed like they tried to use
Yeah,
the
it was.
same language and boundaries and things that, we had there too.
Yeah, and I felt like the rationales that they gave were good in terms of the architectural preservation, historic preservation, and particularly connection to the African-American community. There's a lot here, though, in this. Do we want to go through this line by line, or?
Well, if we want to, I think we've already kind of talked about number one, keeping the houses along Rosser to
Yeah,
to
the
stay
houses
RA.
along Rosser would be RA, but
At
James,
least where, unless they're fronting on Preston Avenue. Then the Rock House is basically here.
No higher
Right.
than CX3.
Well, and so just to note on the Rock House, I'm just not sure what the concern is, given that it's already designated as an IPP.
Right, I don't understand that either, but
is it?
it is an IPP.
Right.
Okay.
So given that it's an individually protected property under the historic statutes,
I'm guessing, I'm not saying it's right, but I would guess the concern is just that we had recently waived one. I'm guessing that's where it would come from.
What, you waive something to,
I don't know if that's the right term, but
The council
Remove the
recently
designation.
removed IP, or actually, you haven't removed the
Yeah.
IPP designation. You permitted a demolition
yeah,
of an IPP
for
property.
the Rock House on Stadium. and-
so what do we
but
need
that-
to, so what do we need to do to address that?
Well, if we wanted to give it more protection, their argument is we should make it, I assume, RA, so that there would be less reason why somebody would want to do something different with it,
Okay, can we do that?
if you want to. How do
Okay.
folks feel about that?
I'm all for it.
I'm fine with it.
I'm fine with
I
that.
think that area in there, there's a lot to be
Yeah, so
preserved.
it's a lot, yeah,
Lot.
yeah.
Yeah,
East side Preston Avenue, Rugby Road intersection to Washington Park.
Where
They're
are
saying
you?
go from RX3 to RA or RB.
Which
Okay.
number are you looking at?
Number
Number
3,
okay.
how will that affect, oh, you're talking about the houses, okay. Okay.
On the east side of the Philly.
You're talking about this is, let me make sure.
East side,
Yeah.
go,
Is that-
Jenny, go north a little bit.
These up here? Is that what they're talking about?
No, east side would be the other side. From Washington Park. Could you read it again, Counselor?
It says, hold on, the row of small houses on the east side of the hilly part of Preston Avenue are a part of the historically African-American community. RA or RB would be more appropriate designations than RX3.
They've got to be talking about up at the top.
Yeah, it's 1222, 1220
Yeah.
Preston.
Yeah, it's kind of where it slips off, I think. So-
Jenny, just take us a little bit
So
north.
this, I'm kind of losing my, where's north? North is to the
North.
right.
North is going this way,
Are
right?
we still
Not
running it
directly,
north-south?
but close.
Yeah. Yeah, see the compass in the left corner?
I don't see the compass. Where is the compass?
The arrows pointing at the
Oh,
compass.
yeah, okay, good.
So
North
it's,
straight up.
it's on the east side there, that taupe north of the green, is that what we're
Yes,
talking about?
yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So how far is that from,
And then number
How-
4, Leah, is Tinsley Town, which is right behind your church.
yes, I
A
know,
little farther north.
Which
Yeah.
is the other part of that
right.
brownish.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and you,
that's right
and you
there.
have to go with those three, because one of those three, I think, is Mitchell House in the number 3, right? With the three small, the three small houses.
Yeah, I know three
Yeah.
small houses, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of them is Mitchell House in that three small.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? The brick house right before
I
you get to the church?
don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I don't-
All right, so we can,
So I personally would be comfortable with items 1 through 4 here that Preservation Piedmont has laid out for Preston Avenue area, going with their suggestions of, frankly, the RA. I think there's enough history there to be preserved.
you could do
Yeah.
the same for 5 and 6.
Michael, how do you feel about them?
Because Cynthiana is where Grace used to live.
I mean, generally,
707.
Yep.
definitely agree, and I know there was ongoing work in terms of documenting the history of some of these areas. The challenge for me is just not knowing every specific parcel. It's kind of hard to figure out, 100% understand what
Yeah.
every single change is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like they've been giving us pretty credible, well-documented information for, and this is a group that I have some confidence in, that what they're giving us is reasonable, so.
Yeah, yeah,
And 1 through, 1 through 6, we can identify as
Well, so if we go,
African-American communities.
if you go on down that sheet, Leah, you'll see a table at the bottom. You got the table?
All right, hold on, let me keep going.
Yeah, next page.
All right, here we go. I'm here.
So under Rose Hill, that's items 5 and 6 and 7.
Yeah. I'm just, okay. East Grady Avenue, okay. This is Grady, Tenderpage, okay.
So that's Concord Ave from Forest Street to Albemarle.
Yep.
Jenny, keep going east a little bit.
Cynthiana.
And then 707 is listed. Did you see it?
Yep.
The thing?
There, that's where you are.
The Rose Hill folks wanted us to do this too, I think.
yeah, we got something from Dan or something.
I don't have as strong of feelings about those, but
We
it does,
can-
I think, play in, Michael, to what you were talking about in terms of
Just
protecting
placement.
that
Yep.
part of Rose Hill.
Absolutely, it does. So now we're down to the Venable. We're down.
Let's first of all make sure we got understanding of how folks feel on 5 and 6.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is this guy here.
Jenny, could you do me a favor and click on existing zoning in this area?
Yeah. Oh, okay. They talked about it. Okay, hold it. They said
So,
that RA would be more appropriate than RB to match the RA zoning in the core of the Rose Hill neighborhood. That's 5 and 6. When we're talking about the intersection of Grady Avenue with 10th Street and 10.5 Street is a part of the 10th and Page and Venable Heights and should be RA or RB rather than CX5. And that's the Grady Avenue one.
all right, well,
Well,
if.
I'm not sure we got done with 5 and 6.
Yeah,
Oh,
can-
I'm
if we can
sorry.
stick
We're at
with
5 and
four-
6.
The main thing I wanted to show by bringing up the existing zoning is that the action that we've taken to date in this area is to shift the industrial zoning to the other side of the tracks. And our goal has been to create zoning in this area that's more residentially compatible. But we're also recognizing that the existing zoning imparts a great deal of development rights, and so we're trying to be cautious about removing those rights.
So if you went from RA to RB, you would remove development
Well,
rights?
I'm just noting, we have industrial zoning in this area, some of which we've converted to RB, And then we also have the B, I believe there was a request also to change the zoning where it's showing NX3, which is currently B3 and industrial.
And that is
Can you
not.
switch back to the proposed zoning? Okay, so you're talking about here.
And Updale and on the other side of Rose Hill. All that's purple is currently B3 or it's industrial.
And it would be going to NX 3 or 5? Is that what that is?
Yeah,
Yeah, NX 3 or 5.
yep.
We
NX?
do have that sensitive corridor area adjacent to that on Preston.
On Preston. So I'm cognizant of the arguments that are made in the letter from Rose Hill, which I think are both very well articulated and very well made. But I'm also concerned about the existing property rights inherent in that area as well. I don't know if this is anything that you guys want to speak on?
Are you saying would be effectively downzoning it?
Specifically on those parcels, but we can provide further advice on that on Monday.
Okay.
And I don't, at least in what they sent us, the current are all R1S, M1, and that's it.
Was there not a comment in there about the proposal for NX5 and NX3?
In the letter from Rose Hill?
For Rose Hill, no.
Yes, no, not in the letter from Rose Hill Neighborhood Association?
Sorry, I'm still looking at Preservation Piedmont.
Sorry, yeah, I did.
We're
Someone had
merging
mentioned
those.
that there was an overlap between those letters and what was discussed.
So,
Okay, so what are we thinking for RA, RB, for 5 and 6?
yeah, for 5 and 6.
So, what, James, with that, I think you were concerned about the change in the
Yeah.
land use?
And just checking
Oh,
in with the team here, it sounds like we'd like some time to look into
Right,
this issue
okay.
further.
So can we do this? Let me ask you if we
Yeah.
can do, if we may do this, not can we, may we? You and your team will look at the Rose Hill neighborhood section, the Venable neighborhood section, and there was another little section in
I'm
here.
not sure of what the Venables, so just at this point.
Well,
I think
5 and
we'd-
6.
We'd like some time to look
Right,
at
which is the Rose Hill neighborhood.
The Rose
5,
Hill.
6, and 7, they're listing as Rose Hill. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so if
Well,
we,
y'all are looking at a different thing than I'm looking at then.
okay, then look. Okay.
Yeah, just for,
So the 7 is 10th and 10th and a half Street.
Yes, and Grady.
And that's that block up, couple
Yes.
blocks up there.
And so that's what we're asking them to look at. The Concord and Cynthiana, Forest Street and Albemarle Street, and the Grady Avenue, the intersection of Grady with 10th and 10 and a half Street.
and I was confused because there's Preservation Piedmont's document, which lists the by right zoning, and basically everything is keep what the existing one is. And there's a separate document from the Rose Hill Neighbors Association that's other implications.
Yep.
So I think they're two different
So we need to see,
implications
I
there.
need to see
Our-
what both of them.
We're
we
asking
need
for
to
some
see the
additional time to
yeah,
look
the
at
implications of both.
the implications particularly, and of both of those, but in particular, I'm thinking about the Rose Hill Neighborhood Association letter.
Mm-hmm.
And as it applies to that whole block basically bounded by
Correct.
Rose and the railroad tracks.
Okay.
Do we want to keep going down the Preservation Piedmont's letter for these other items, Venable, for example? As items
Well,
8 and 9?
I'm going down the Preservation Piedmont letter just
Okay.
because it's so well organized and so on. I gather the numbers all translate from one to the next.
Yeah, they
I have
do.
8.
So, Mr. Freeze, are you asking to give some more thought to number 7 also?
I don't have that in front of me.
Okay,
I was
7
talking
is the
about,
intersection of Grady with 10th and 10th and a half Street in that block.
and what is their,
Well, it says
Recommendation
that
for
as part of 10th and Page at Venable Heights should be RA or RB rather than CX5. I gather they're talking about that area. Some of which we already talked about in terms of
We did.
of the Rock House.
Right, I mean, if the inclination of council is that that block should be in a residential district because of the Rock House, then I'd just assume, well, actually, Jenny, can you show me what's the existing zoning on that block, please?
B3.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, again, we've got B3 in this area. I think we'd
Yeah.
like some time to look at this.
You need to look
Okay.
at that. Okay.
Because that would be effectively downzoning it.
Yep.
So 5, 6, and 7, we're going to take some time on. Number 8 is University Circle, Rugby Road, Venable Neighborhood, currently zoned RUMD and R3. They want it to go back to we're proposed for RX3 until the Planning Commission made some hurried, inappropriate, last-minute changes. They want to go back to RX3. So what did the Planning Commission do there?
Jenny, can you show the August zoning? So the RX3
They
was.
go to RX5 maybe? is
Yep.
that-
Yeah, sorry, the shading's a little different, the current layer is a little bit more, so they look a little different, but.
So that entire area is RX3, and then the proposal is now it's RX5 with the exception of that Preston Place, Cabell, Rugby Road area.
So why don't we do this, Brian? If you send this to Mr. Freeze, he could look at it, and he wouldn't feel like he's doing something on the fly. And we could have the best guess or the best whatever. I mean, like, he took time to do this, okay? And I think he would like to have the same opportunity, he and his team, to do this for this. So do we think that we can agree to give him time to do that? Is that fair or no?
I mean, this is really our last
This is the last go?
work session. We
Kind of
got,
at the bitter end.
yeah, we got the public hearing and then it's our discussion, right?
Well, and recognize anything we do tonight isn't bound in
Yeah.
stone either, so.
So, James, just a quick question. So we had talked a few minutes ago about essentially downzoning, if we go with some of these recommendations. Would that be considered a taking?
Can I just interject there before this conversation gets too far about nomenclature? Based on what I understand from talking to Mr. Freeze, the map does not propose downzonings, which is a reduction in density from the current land use. If you are talking about a reduction of what is proposed as upzonings, it is not called a downzoning.
I understand.
So I really want to make sure, because that has legal implications that can start spinning out, and I
understand. I was going by what they were recommending.
Yes,
Is that what you're
understand.
going to?
Yes, that's why it's a term that has been picked up and used by some members of the community, inadvertently not understanding the legal implications. So I really wanted to interject that, because as I understand it, there are no downzonings proposed other than one area, which is,
No, but in this instance, what we're discussing is a proposal from a couple different organizations to take what's proposed for zoning and bring it to a lesser
That is
intensity than
correct.
the existing zoning. And I think we would like some time to talk about the
okay,
implications of that.
we will do that, but I just want to make sure that everybody's
It's
cautious on the terminology.
It's a lower, what is being requested, the topic of some of the emails, as we understand it, is a less intensive zoning than what is currently being proposed.
And then the current zoning ordinance that exists today. And so that's what we need some time to discuss the implications. And I wouldn't come out and say that it's a takings at this point or anything like that. I'd say we need some time to discuss it.
Thank you.
Right.
Understood.
Right,
No,
exactly.
We wouldn't
That's
say
a-
anything remotely
yes,
like that at the moment. But we will review, and I suspect that will, again, be another topic we'll discuss on Monday evening.
So Lloyd, do we want to just try to power through the rest of their list, or we kind of gotten as far as we think?
Well, I guess I would like to just, I'd like to go through and see if we can get agreement on some of them, and so we can at least minimize the
Okay.
amount of homework we're giving to Mr.
So
Freeze.
number 8, University Circle, they propose RX3 versus RX5. I don't know the rationale per se, but
Well, I don't know why the planning commission had made it RX5 anyway, but, and I take it that what they're talking about is this area? That's easy. That, up there? Is that right? Roughly the east side of University Way, both sides of Rugby between the tracks and Grady. In other words, frat row.
so they're really just talking about this, right?
St. John is up there by Venable School. St. John Street is up by Venable School. I mean, not St. John, but John Street is up by Venable School.
Correct. John Street's over here.
I see. Yeah, it's that whole area.
This whole area as well.
So they wanted to remain RX3.
Whereas the planning commission wanted to make it RX5. And again, it's sort of on the theory of there's only a bunch of students there anyway, and let's put as many in there as we can.
I don't have strong opinions about that.
I don't either.
I don't either.
I'm fine with leaving it as RX5.
I'm fine with that too.
And that's a classic case of the market will do what the market will do. And I don't know, there's maybe a handful of people who are not students who live in there. So let's leave that alone.
Which one is 9?
Number 8.
Number 8.
So number 9, Rugby Road Historic HC District, currently R1SU, is proposed entirely for RBRC and RX3.
Where is that?
It just,
Number
there we go.
9.
And basically all along Rugby Road, all should be changed to RA.
Can you bring that up, please? Back up. Thank you.
And I have to say that
I feel like that's been litigated. All of this has been litigated extensively over the last.
and that's an area that for a whole lot of reasons, I think, can tolerate a lot more density than it's got.
I mean, I just think it's been argued tooth and nail for a long time, all of these things.
Okay.
Okay, so we will say no to that. Ridge Street, iconic residences in the Architectural Design Control District, currently zoned R2. They want to keep it RB, want to be zoned RB and not RC. Ridge Street.
Keep going.
Other way.
Yep, sorry.
Other way.
South and east.
Sorry, I'm having some technical issues over here. I'm gonna just reset. It's gonna be
Don't worry about it. We got it. I mean, we understand. She's refreshing.
This has been very helpful to have this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like.
Good idea, Leah.
Yeah.
Yes, you know I'm a visual person.
We all are, really.
Oh, God, I might believe it.
Okay.
Okay, so it
So Ridge
says,
Street is basically between Cherry Avenue and Main Street, right? The Architectural Design Control District? Can you show the ADC?
Yep, it's the historic district tab.
Like where, the daycare, what is it called?
There we go.
Barrett Daycare.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
This would be between Dice Street and Cherry.
Okay,
Actually, but on below Cherry Avenue too.
yeah.
There are a lot of beautiful houses there.
Up there where Mr.
Yeah.
Ferguson's funeral home used to be, on that end of Ridge Street, right?
Yeah, that's
In there
basically,
somewhere.
right there is Ferguson's funeral home.
Yeah,
used to
and
be.
Mr. Williams lives
Mr.
up
Williams
there.
lives right there,
Yeah. And Miss
and Ms.
Pleasant.
Williams too.
Yes, they're both there together. And, you know,
And Barrett's up here.
and you know, the Pleasants live further up, down here on Ridge Street, because they live down the street from,
Mhm.
you remember Alma Pleasant? She
Mhm.
was a teacher.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're saying it should be zoned RB instead of RC?
Yes.
Wait, what did they say? Hold on.
Preservation
Yes,
Piedmont
they want
wants
RB, not RC. Yes, you're right.
Don't we already have protections for the architectural districts and?
They're all subject to design review with the BAR.
Yeah.
So we don't have to deal with that, right?
Feels like they've already had this conversation and.
The other thing, if I understand correctly, aren't both RB and RC governed by the same maximum? 12 units with a bonus?
Yes.
That the only real difference that I can tell for density is that the bonus for RC, I mean, you start with 8 and you go to 10 if you're preserving the existing structure and go to 12 max, whereas the other one is 6, 8, and 12 versus 8, 10, and 12.
Yep.
I don't see a lot of difference between the two of them, frankly.
I think there's a different bonus height, that's it.
Yeah, so it's
You've killed it.
Okay, so East High Street.
And there it is. Okay. It's coming up.
Jenny, so we can see the map, but are you able to move it, or are you frozen?
Give her a minute.
There must have been too many people watching at home rushing to get on the platform.
Well, you know. Something just happened.
someone said council is muted.
Yes, we are.
Don't.
The best.
That's too easy, I know.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, so,
And we can, yeah, we can see your entire screen.
and so now we have to do the, where are we?
East High is where we're going.
East High Street.
So we need to go north from here.
Okay.
Or south side of High Street between Second and North.
Yeah, but,
Okay, here we go.
and is this a, what's the, do we need to show a overlay district of some
The
kind?
two sides of East High Street within the ADC district should match in height.
Oh,
The north side is proposed CX3, the south side for CX8.
This is actually a conservation district.
It's up on the left.
So we don't have to do anything, right? Because it's
Is this- no,
protected.
Wait, that's not south side. What is it that they're?
What?
Oh, over there. I got you. I'm sorry. I was thinking
Oh.
over here. I'm sorry. Go west, Jenny. There you go. It's that portion of High Street. Other west. Sorry.
Sorry.
Where are we talking about?
There's more than one west, the other west.
Okay, so
A little bit more.
It would
Keep
be
going
North
west.
by northwest.
between 2nd Street Northwest and 7th Street Northeast.
That's good. Thank you.
So basically all along here.
Okay.
Which was previously, had previously been put in CX5, and at the request of Preservation Piedmont, we actually lowered it to this designation that's there proposed today.
Well, their letter says Planning Commission is recommending
Was that Preservation
CX8.
Pete? Yeah.
Oh, on all right, I was looking at the north side of that, they're looking at the south side, sorry. So that,
And then the north side is CX3, would be along here.
Okay, so we still
And
have to
here
do
it's
this,
CX8,
and we've already talked
and they want to
about
make it
this,
all CX3.
remember? Because this is all this.
And
No, we've already done this.
I gotta say, I think it
These
ought
are
to be at least
corridors.
CX5.
So we just have to do this in the transition, so, okay.
I mean, I don't think it ought to go down to CX3.
Isn't it already 5?
is
Well,
it 8?
they're proposing for 8.
Planning Commission has it at 8, CX8.
I mean, we're moving from DX to CX8 to CX3 as you go north across there. I feel like this is something that has probably been discussed at length and argued about already. I don't know that I have any real thing to add to it. I'm fine with just leaving it as the planning commission has it.
I'm fine with that.
Is it what I would have chosen if I were starting off on the planning commission 3 years ago? Maybe not, but this is where they landed.
All right,
Yeah, I'm fine with CS.
Michael? Let's leave it
Leaving
CX8?
I'm good with leaving it.
You having
Okay.
fun yet, Michael?
Yeah, he's
No,
like,
he's
man,
not.
I wanted to study this some
He
more.
stopped having fun a long time.
Number 12, between First Street North and Second Street Northeast, they want to zone them all RA. Planning Commission recommends RB. Basically here.
No.
Where are we?
It must be,
Between First Street and Second Street.
it's up, just a block north of where you just pointed, where it's yellow,
There?
I guess. That's between first and second, and it's currently RB.
You're right.
First Street North and Second Street Northeast are located in the larger lots within the north.
Oh, maybe they're talking about, well, no, that's,
Planning Commission chose to spot zone those lots for RB.
It's,
Can we find First Street North, address 433?
and 436, I think that's these two.
yep.
Again, without access to the Planning Commission's logic.
The logic would have been driven by the comprehensive plan in this case. Jenny, can you pull up the land use map, please? So that area was shown as medium intensity in the land use map. So that's why that's the basis for the designation.
Although the reason why they would be, those two lots would be singled out for medium intensity there is not real clear to me.
Yeah. Jenny, do you have a notion for that?
They're physically larger.
It's the size. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Any desire to change it, folks?
I would trust PC's judgment.
We're sticking with the planning commission.
Michael? Sticking with the planning commission? Okay.
They'll be happy.
Proposed, number 13, proposed by right height and bonus height proposed in DX are not appropriate in downtown district. Allowed maximum by right height should be lowered to current by right levels. Special use permits should be considered for greater heights, especially on the mall and on South Street. So it would go from currently 70 feet or 101 by an SUP. The Planning Commission's recommendation is 142 feet or 184 with bonus height. And then the Preservation Piedmont suggestion is to reduce the overall by right and bonus heights or allow somewhat greater heights by SUP.
Yeah, I mean,
So, and just remember, the main controlling factor is stories. So, Missy, what's the story height limit downtown?
DX.
Yeah.
13?
Not in the proposed, but in the existing, just because that's, the
Oh,
contention that's being made is that that it's higher than what, they want us to lower it to what's allowed today, and I just want to see what's allowed today, make sure we're clear on that. So, do you have that with you?
I don't have that ready. I'll get it though.
Thank you.
Is feet is not helpful?
It's, the stories is the real controlling factor, right? The feet in the proposed zoning is just there to put a cap, but allow flexibility on how story height is allocated so that you can mix it up between residential and office, incorporate a tall first floor if you're doing a lobby, that kind of thing. So that's, no one's going to build to 184 feet because I don't rent wall space, I rent floor space. So what I care about is number of stories. But they didn't, we need to compare how many stories you can get in the existing versus the proposed.
I think part of their contention seems to also be what is SUP currently versus like
Right.
transferring that over somehow.
Well, right, and this whole area is also subject to BAR
Right.
review.
Could you remind me what that, how the BAR will, how that control will work through all of this district?
Well, in all BAR districts, all districts controlled by the BAR, we've explicitly included language in their review authority that they have the authority to limit height and massing based on their guidelines and the intent of historic preservation in the downtown.
Well, just in general,
So it'd be 6.
So 6 stories is the current, so this is an increase in the number of stories that are allowed.
again, I feel like this is something the planning commission likely went round and round with them about.
Yeah, listen in on one of their times.
I know that they don't agree philosophically, but I feel like if this was something that had the light of day as an idea.
In particular, since it's not anything specific that they're recommending, I'm going to go with planning commission proposal. I mean, recommend.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Michael,
Michael's
go
going to
ahead.
say something.
Go, Mark.
I don't know how much it will matter with the BAR review, but I would just say I'm open to it. I mean, it is a major historic asset.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
you're saying this still does have BAR review, right?
Yes.
All
But
right.
there's,
Go ahead.
it's less clarity. I mean, I'm not saying that's not the direction we would want to go, but just so we're aware, I mean, it just means there's going to be less clarity and more ambiguity in terms of what's determined as appropriate or not.
For the entire DX area? All right, help me out here. I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. So what is it that they're proposing that you're saying will give more clarity?
And strictly in terms of the stories of building, it would provide greater clarity there, whereas the BAR has the purview to make design control decisions, including about the height of building, subject to their guidelines. That will be determined by who's on the BAR, what the guidelines are, and then all of those individuals' interpretation of what that means, which could mean all kind of different things. I'm not even saying that's not necessarily the way to go. I'm just
Yeah, but you're articulating the challenge, and it's absolutely there. This is one of those places where we have an objective for predictability, but we also have an objective for historic preservation, and there's going to be a certain degree of ambiguity in kind of the design review that happens with historic preservation. We can try and correct for that by better articulating objectives within the guidelines.
What is the height allowed by DX?
So it's 10 stories at the base, and then it has the affordable housing bonus that allows you an additional 3.
And Ms. Creasy just said the existing is...
Existing, we believe, is 6.
Yes, because, so 70 feet equates to 6 stories in another part of the code.
Right. Yeah, we don't have a strict story measurement in the existing.
But we have
code.
buildings downtown that are taller than that by SUP.
We must, yeah.
Yeah.
We
Up
don't,
to
we
Or
do.
because they've been there before the zoning code
Well,
says.
Like
we-
the
the
code building
code
in
building
Bay.
is higher.
Yeah.
Well, and by SUP, it's up to 101 feet, whatever the story equivalent that is
Yeah.
today.
101 probably gets you at 9.
9.
So what was the logic or the discussion between the planning commission and the folks at Piedmont?
I don't know that there was a direct discussion between those.
But I mean, in terms of what are the two distinct philosophies, if you could, at 9:30 on a Wednesday night?
Yeah, I want to be careful trying to speak for others. I mean, I
I guess the
think,
planning commission is saying, let's just let 1,000 flowers bloom, let it go higher
Yeah.
and put it in the control of the
this
BAR.
is
and-
downtown, right? And, yeah, you've got competing interests in the downtown area, right? On the one hand, this is a logical place to see intense development, greater height and all those things. But we also have a very strong interest in historic preservation in this area. Those are going to be competing interests, probably forever.
And their proposal is to do an SUP to mitigate that.
I don't know that mitigates it, that just brings it to council to decide.
And the BAR again. by
And the
another-
BAR still, so you now have 2 discretionary review processes.
Yeah, I don't know, I feel like.
You're still on 13?
Yep, still on
Yeah, no,
13.
yeah, for this one, I support the planning commission's
Yeah,
recommendation.
I think I do too.
I think I do 3.
How
Okay.
many are on this list?
This is the last
One
one.
more.
Just check.
Before the next page.
Okay. Avon Street,
The last
entrance corridor, busy entrance into downtown is lined with historic residences on small lots with no parking available on the street. Part of Avon Street is also included within the North Belmont National Register District. South of Hinton Avenue, RA would be more appropriate than RC. So, basically, this area, they would like to make RA.
It seemed like it's one of those entrance corridors that you were talking about.
What did the
before.
planning commission say?
The planning commission's got it as RC.
Okay.
And I think, I mean, they're already, like, there's some small stores along in there, it's, you know, I don't have a problem with it as RC.
I don't
Neither
Yes.
do
feel
I.
like countervailing the
I don't know.
planning
I
commission.
don't want to contend with the planning commission today.
Michael? RC okay?
I suppose so.
Okay. All right, that gets us through their list.
Michael's fading.
I'm not fading, I've had no time to review these, so like, what am I
Okay.
deciding?
Decision fatigue.
His voice is going.
Let's see, we
We are
got
now
off-
at
got off
Locust and
James's
Calhoun.
list.
We're
Locust
now,
and Calhoun.
we're on Locust and Calhoun. Page number 3 from James's memo.
And that, again, is a question about an intersection that by making it RC, we end up increasing over time the density at that
I mean, I
particular
live
spot.
around the corner from there, I don't have an issue with it staying as it is.
You're good with RC?
I mean, to me, this is one that, I mean, this is the streets that work typology that's driving this. So it's not an arbitrary thing, it's by the mapping logic, this is where it belongs. It is kind of an unusual spot, I mean, we just walking through there, you're like, really, why would we do this? But
Right.
it does make sense, given its proximity, and it is one of the places that people cut through that we were talking about earlier, but
Yeah,
I don't have a reason to contravene the planning commission on this one.
Well, if Brian says we should stay RC, I will go with you.
Juan?
I'm looking at my house.
And how far is it?
Juan, where's your house? Show us right here. Because I cut through there, you know, I get off the ramp and I cut
I
through.
support the plan commission.
Okay, so we got a majority there. Transition, I had asked specifically that we talk a little bit about some specific transition places and to understand better what those transitions are gonna look like. I don't know whether folks have more questions about them.
I didn't.
No, and I see the gateway areas
We've
talked
covered
about
that
Yeah,
ad nauseam.
an hour and a half.
So I think that as far as the transition, I think that, James, you mentioned this earlier, is that I think that what we and I think the community don't want to see is like what happened on Main Street, you know, as it, you know, because I've given many walking tours, you know, and we're walking through West Haven, and you look up towards Main Street and you just see the back of
Yeah.
and that's what we don't, I believe that we don't want to see again. So I hope that this addresses this, zoning ordinance addresses that. But I'm
To the
fine.
best of its ability, it probably does, because you know, when things are approved, you see one plan and then it goes up and it ends up being something else, because I don't think, I mean, I don't know who was on the planning commission then, but I don't think it was their intent for it to look like it looks.
Yeah, I
But
don't
I may
have
be wrong.
a problem with what James has described here.
Okay,
I can go with Mr. Freeze.
all right, so we have two spots that were not on the original list. One, I had communicated to Mr. Freeze because of some emails that we were getting today, was to touch on the Wright's Wrecking Yard location. And while we're at it, to just go on down Market Street to the Woolen Mills.
Okay.
And the folks, you all got many emails in the last 48 hours about
At
it.
least.
There's
This is it right there.
Wright's.
Yep.
Where is Wright? Okay,
this
that's
area
it,
here.
yeah.
Yep.
I know where that is, all right.
And of course, one of the challenges with this is there's a large change in elevation. For whatever that may be worth. And of course, you come down Market Street all the way, and you've got a lot of problems there with very narrow streets and that kind of thing.
But I couldn't quite figure out, most of their neighborhood is still RA.
Yeah,
They were concerned about that one little section there. Is there a way to hide the layers, the little,
or just scoot it a little further to the left.
No, she can close it.
There, okay. I mean, that's all RA already.
With Chesapeake Street and all of that
Chesapeake
is?
and Market and so
The
on.
RB.
Except up around Chesapeake and Mead, but that's really not the old
Near the
Woolen
pool.
Mills area.
That's
yeah.
where the pool is, right?
And then
This
you've got
area-
the area on Riverside, which is pretty much all affordable subsidized housing, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
yeah, I couldn't quite understand why they were so upset. And it seems like,
I wonder,
Well, what-
was there an earlier draft that treated it differently or something?
You want to open thank you.
Doesn't look like it.
I don't know, she's getting ready to open.
Oh, you
it.
got to go back. There you go.
Yeah, the
Here's the
early
first version. And so the key difference is in the Wright's property, scrapyard property, which was initially proposed for the entire property to be an NX5. And actually, in this case, the Planning Commission brought it down to NX3 as it fronts like Market Street. And then the intensity goes up to NX8 in the back corner, which is, I understand, is the lowest portion of the property.
so that seems like a reasonable
Mead down there.
compromise.
No.
Down at the corner of Mead and the railroad tracks.
That's the highest portion of the property,
That's the highest portion of the property?
yeah.
Sorry.
But it goes down very sharply down into there. Right here is the highest part of the property, but it goes down very sharply right across.
Okay.
And so,
I'm just reflecting back on the conversation at the Planning Commission.
Yeah, well, I mean, the starting point is that I'm not aware of the Wrights family having any immediate interest in doing anything with the property. So I don't know that there's an immediate problem, but obviously they might be tempted if somebody looked at it and said, man, I could put a 10-story building there.
Even with the topography?
Right now, the way it's zoned is, was that NX8 up in the corner? There?
No, it's
Is that NX5?
it's 8 there and
8,
5
okay.
at the street.
Oh,
Yeah. And it's
I'm
a
sorry,
big
3.
site.
Did I say 5 or 3?
uh-huh,
Yeah.
you did.
Yeah, that,
NX3, okay.
that doesn't
And
seem unreasonable to me.
it is a big site, no question. And if you look at where is there enough space to do something dramatic, that's one of the very few places in Charlottesville where we can say there's enough space. Now, it would be a real bear of a site to have to bring into compliance with environmental regulations, but it's at least an open space.
So what should we do with that?
I'm inclined to leave it, frankly.
Just leave it as it is.
Yeah, because it's not,
We're leaving it
Too
as it
bad.
is.
And this is one where the planning commission did talk about it, and I listened to the discussion, and I generally agreed with the discussion they were having, and so.
Then we have the meadows.
And then the meadows.
So have we taken care of everything on Mr. Freeze's memo?
Yes.
All right.
And we're now dealing with the second of 2 places that were identified as other things we should talk about, even though they weren't on the list.
Right, because you mentioned the meadows at some
Right, earlier
little
tonight.
thing when we were in the basement.
Earlier tonight. So what's the issue?
I think really the substantive question at hand, which I thought was separate from our conversations tonight, but maybe it's not, is the extent of the RNA district. In my mind, it
Oh,
would
that's
be
right.
if it applies here or not. The argument would be you have a large amount of non-subsidized affordable rentals, and with the scale of height and density increase, there's a displacement risk there.
We don't want to displace.
Yeah, I don't know that, I'm trying to remember what the RKG report said about that area. Is that one of the areas that is likely? or
It's
unlikely?
included, they put all the sensitive communities together into
Okay.
one.
So yes, I mean, it is an area that would be likelier to turn over.
Yeah.
But why? Simply
Well, and
because
that's-
property values are relatively low?
Yeah, that's exactly the why, yeah.
I mean,
That's the area of dispute too. Including after the last conversation that council had, I've consistently heard from, and I'm only hearing from literally like a couple residents out there. They're consistently opposed to being brought into the RNA. I don't have a wider sense of where that community is.
Oh.
I'm only hearing from a couple, literally a couple people.
Right.
And I think there, the risk would be particularly high because you've got a larger amount of kind of mid-sized apartment complexes that are just older and again with no subsidy, are very ripe redevelopment opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, the argument I'm getting from those residents is they actually feel like they are the forgotten corner,
Uh-huh.
that they're surrounded primarily by big roads and highways, and that they don't feel like they have the same kind of pressure that we see downtown.
They're forgotten until they're discovered.
Yeah.
Do you know if they're homeowners or renters or?
I
a
know the-
combination.
I mean, the people I've spoken with are homeowners, I know that. But
Yeah, and I think there'll be a big difference in experience for sure, homeowner versus renter throughout the city, but particularly in that area.
So what should we do?
Well, at this point, I'm not inclined to change anything, because I frankly don't think that it's a real high likelihood of getting redeveloped. But there's one other analysis that I wanted to take a look at, and I forgot to take a look at before I came. And I'll say nothing we're doing tonight is set in stone anyway, so I'm inclined to leave it as is.
Well, I think people are faded out of the conversation, so maybe we should return to this at another point.
So
Sounds like
it's
now
pretty,
But for now, you'd like to leave it and revisit it at another time Is
Well-
that what I'm hearing?
I think it at least in part warrants inclusion in the RNA framework.
Which part of the meadows? I mean, it's easier to tell, like with 10th and Page, we've got like a sort of clear, are you talking about pretty much everything that's in taupe?
I don't know what the exact parcels are, but it would be, there are parcels which you could kind of identify as being those older apartment complexes with medium to high amount of renters. But I can't tell you right now exactly what those parcels are.
But they're on Angus Road, aren't they?
In part, yes.
There's Cedar Hills. Is that something that you all could,
We would certainly need to discuss, if we're talking about taking apartment complexes and moving them into the RNA district, that's something that our team would need to discuss.
But where are they, what are they in now? Could you refresh my memory?
They're in multifamily districts.
Okay. There are 3.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way we can boost the resolution on the larger on the building footprints on there, because it's not that kind of map, but the apartment complexes are the larger buildings.
And they were not in this whole big at all, right?
What?
You never considered changing their zoning designation? Not you, the planning commission. Oh.
They're, I mean, we just modified them to the, where we, into the appropriate zones within the proposed zoning.
I see, okay. All right.
Yeah, I want to see the oceans on here.
Yes, we need to. Let's go on a trip.
Well, and quite frankly as well, I can't even remember. I think the entrance corridor overlaps with part of it too, which is another.
We can flip on the entrance corridor. It wouldn't go into the neighborhood, but it would encompass all of the apartments that are fronting on Hydraulic are in the entrance corridor.
We're not talking about entrance corridors anymore. We beat that dead horse enough.
Have we exhausted the topics as well as ourselves?
okay, one last thing. Did folks get this email from Dan Rosenzweig? Hack, final recommendations for zoning code update dated November 13th, 2023.
Well, we did discuss those at a previous work session, and I believe our consensus was to incorporate pretty much all of them. There's
Okay.
one thing we didn't discuss, which was the height bonus, but obviously we're not going to get into that in detail tonight.
So you're saying that this letter, we've essentially already discussed it?
It was incorporated into the discussion on November 13th.
Got it, okay. I wonder why he sent that to me today.
Yeah, he sent it.
I think
Well,
there might
Brian,
have.
when you get 1,000 emails a day, it's very easy to overlook one.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, in that regard, we're going to be providing you some further advice regarding those options that were set forth in that letter on Monday.
Okay. Good. Thank you. All right. Anything else we need to do or can do?
So Monday is a regular.
It's a regular
meeting.
city
Right,
council meeting.
Yes.
Be there.
And
You
I take it
can.
we will have some.
Tuesday's the public hearing.
Huh? Tuesday's a public hearing.
Right.
Monday is a regular meeting.
But we're going to talk about this.
Are we going to talk about that during the closed session, or are we going to talk about that?
Yes, sir, closed meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We're adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Freeze.
James, you're a rock star. You stood up for like almost 4 hours.
I have
Well,
a
you-
standing desk as well, so I've been standing all day.
Oh, so.
That's how entertainers roll.